morning. I'd ask the California State Library representatives to come up and join us up front, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you being here this Monday morning. Just for clarification, when you're speaking, if you'd face this direction, that would be perfect. If you want to sit on the side, that's fine. But when you're speaking, if you could move to those seats. We have some of our other members on the way. We'll be here shortly, but just in the interest of time and the busyness of the day and your time, we will go ahead and begin our committee hearing at this time. We have 6 issues that we'll be addressing this morning. We'll be hearing the governor's budget proposals regarding the California State Library, the California State Department of Education, and a number of issues under that. We'll be breaking after the California State Library to have public comment, and then move on to the next set of issues. So we'll ask public comment to be limited to 2 minutes for each person. And today we will be holding all of these issues open. We won't be taking any action as a committee today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and begin our agenda, and I guess we'll take roll.
Bonilla.
Here.
Berryhill. Brownlee. Nastande. And Swanson.
All right. Today we have Stacy Aldrich and Debbie Newton from the California State Library, and I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves and then give your report. Thank you so much.
Lisa Merzinski with the Department of Finance.
Oh, and Lisa as well. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Aldrich. I'm the State Librarian of California. And good morning. And we have Debbie Newton, who is our Admin Bureau Chief, with us today.
Happy to meet you and glad that you're here. I guess by way of comment, I will divulge that I was a high school English teacher and started a literacy project in the city of Concord and in Contra Costa County, where we now have a functioning literacy network, where all of our literacy providers, we have a directory so people know who's who and are able to refer from various programs within Contra Costa County to serve folks as best as possible. So with that, I'll ask you to begin your comments.
Thank you very much. We're excited to be here today to speak with you about the State Library budget. We are grateful to the governor for trying to impact this economic budget crisis time by trying to come up with some solutions, and we know that there are hard decisions that need to be made. We're also grateful that he has given enough money to the state library in order for us to continue to provide services to Californians, libraries, and also state government for this budget cycle. There were 3 programs that were given 0 in the budget. The Public Library Foundation, or Public Library Funding, which is designed to help support libraries at the local level. It was created after Prop 13 to ensure that libraries were not closed. The California Library Services Act, which is the underpinnings of resource sharing in the state, which leverages local resources, and it enables anyone in the state of California to have access to materials no matter where they are in the state, and helps provide equity of access in the state of California. It also creates the ability for 8 regional libraries to support the 8 regions in the state of California. In particular, the San Joaquin Valley Regional Library provides all of the internet connectivity for all the branches in that region, along with a united online catalog of materials so that they can share resources. So again, this money leverages local resources so that more people can have access around the state. The third program is the California Library Literacy Services Program, which serves about 42,000 people in the state of California. About 22,000 adults plus their families are served. And this program is important because it addresses the needs of people who are native English speakers with less than a 6th grade reading reading level, and the people who fell through the the cracks and are not going to go to a community college because they can't even fill out an application in many cases. So those are the three programs. With the zeroing out of these three programs, we do risk our ability to meet our maintenance of effort to receive federal dollars. The state of California receives about $16.7 million in Library Service and Technology Act funding. I noticed on page 4 of the agenda it says we'll receive 19.7. That's actually our authority. Because the grants that we get one grant a year that's good for 2 years, so they overlap, so the 19.7 is our authority. The maintenance of effort shows the state's commitment to libraries, and in order for us to even be considered for a waiver, we would have to have the state show some commitment, and we're concerned that with zero budget in any of these programs that we would have a difficulty actually getting a waiver. And along with the LSTA funding, we're concerned about losing that funding because it helps us to fund our Braille and Talking Book program at the California State Library. So that is one of the issues with zeroing out the budget for those three programs. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have, and we thank you for your time.
Okay. Any other comments? Thank you. Okay. I think that we'll move on now to Lisa Mrzinski from the Department of Finance.
We just want to say, as the administration, that we recognize how difficult these cuts are. But given the size and magnitude of our structural deficit, the cuts are getting tougher, and this is one of those that we had to make.
Could you just explain why this was slated for elimination, these three, instead of a cut? And then what was the rationale for choosing elimination instead of just a reduction?
I think it was really just the size of the dollars that were needed that we had to go for the larger cut.
But there's a big difference between, it's not a larger cut, it's elimination. I mean, that's a huge difference. So I could understand you saying we needed a larger cut versus a smaller cut. But my question is, elimination, zeroing it out, completely does what the word says. It eliminates it and then puts the federal funds at risk. So what was the rationale behind that?
Well, there's an option with the library that they can apply for a waiver for the federal funds. And that was if it gets to that extent. There also, the actual federal fund loss will not happen until July 2013. So it would be a loss in the out years. And then also the PLF is not included in the maintenance of effort. The $12.9 million for the Public Library Foundation is not part of the maintenance of effort, so it wouldn't impact this.
Have you studied the effects of the elimination beyond just the fact that it would put at risk the federal funds and in the out years?
The risk at the local levels?
Yes.
No, those are really, Stacey could probably address those a little better than I could, but we looked mostly at the federal fund loss and where it would hit and the impacts those would make just to the library's budget.
I guess I would just say, and then we'll ask the Steve Bullard from the LAO's office to come up and join us as well, but I guess I would say that just in this entire budget process, one of the things that we've been hearing from the committee, and you'll hear from me now, is that it's very important, I think, to understand these cuts in the context of the broader economic health and vitality of the state of California. And so while I understand the focus may be on the actual budget lines and achieving a certain number, I think it would be very helpful to us to understand what other economic impacts could result from this kind of elimination. We know, and I'm sure we'll hear from a lot of our public comment, that these dollars are used to actually put people in the workforce, increase their earning power, which would increase their income tax payments. We know that's true. That's not even a contrived theory, because when someone can't read, we know they're not going to earn as much as when they can read. I mean, it's a phenomenal impact on someone's health, on their child's education, on their living situation and on their job situation. So it would really be helpful to the committee to have the finance department, as they look at these cuts, to give us also information on those economic impacts as well. I think we can't, it doesn't, the process lacks the proper context, and it lacks all the integrity we need if we think we're saving money, but in reality, we're actually costing money. And so that's something that the committee has been saying on other issues, that we've been wanting that information as well. And so I will just say that again today, knowing you don't have it with you. But thank you very much. I'd like to invite Legislative Analyst's Office, Steve, to come forward now and give your perspective on this one issue, and then we will move on to public comment on issue number 1. I want to recognize Assemblymember Sandre Swanson joining us. Thank you very much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for starting so promptly.
Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Boylard with the Analyst's Office. I think you got a good overview of what the reductions are. And your agenda, I think, really helps out in kind of illustrating this. If you look on page 2, you do see that there are these 3 larger programs, particularly the Public Library Foundation and the Library Services Act, each of which are losing about $13 million to be, as you pointed out, eliminated, as well as a English Acquisition and Literacy program for about $4.5 million. You then have 2 other programs which do not receive any reductions whatsoever. So, I think we can certainly appreciate Department of Finance's point that there's a need to find budget solutions of one form or another to cover about a $25 billion problem. And we understand, and to the chair's point, I think that any of these solutions, whether they are reductions or whether they are revenue increases, can have negative effects on the economy. This is a point that our office is trying to make, is that if you try and exclude any solutions which have negative consequences, you probably won't have any solutions left. So it's not so much does it have a negative consequence. The question is, which are your better and your worst choices? That said, I think we would agree with the chair's position that we haven't seen any logic or any analysis to illustrate that these programs in particular should take disproportionate cuts, in fact, elimination. These are programs that have been around for decades and are relied upon at the local level. So we certainly would agree that there needs to be some kind of reductions probably in these areas, but we would encourage the legislature to think of other options rather than elimination of these programs without any kind of other logic as to why those programs should not continue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Steve. With that, we'll go to member comments or questions, or we'll hear from the public, whichever you'd prefer to do first.
Madam Chair, I think I will hold my comment to after the public comment, although I have some opinions that I want to share, and I'll do that after we hear public comment.
Thank you. Yes, we'll go ahead to public comment, and if you would introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Assemblyman Swanson, Mike Dillon representing the California Library Association. The witnesses and I will be brief. Stacy Aldrich has done a good job explaining what the 3 programs do. We will try to put some faces with the programs this morning and show how their total elimination will affect the library services and particularly impact poor communities. There's some misconception that these are local programs. The Public Library Foundation passed after Proposition 13 to make up for some of the huge losses. You could argue that should be entirely local, although the cuts would hurt. But saving the California Library Services Act or transaction-based reimbursement program is by far our highest priority. It guarantees, as Ms. Aldrich said, free and equal access to all Californians. And before this committee in prior years, I've said I think the state gets more bang for its buck from this program than any other program that I know of. And if this is eliminated, it's going to return library services to the haves and the have-nots. The third program, which you're very familiar with, Madam Chair, is the literacy program, and we also feel this has a huge benefit for the state. And in a few moments, we'll have a program coordinator and one of the learners that's been through the program. And I just learned this morning that there are some folks here from the California Council for the Blind want to talk about the state program, the Braille program. Two final comments quickly. Usage. Sometimes I hear from members say, well, gee, with Borders books and the internet, our libraries really used to the extent that they have been in the past. And isn't library usage going down? And it's absolutely the opposite. Just about every librarian will tell you that they have tons of students coming in with school libraries closing, people looking for jobs online, things that you mentioned a few moments ago, Madam Chair. And regarding cuts, or in this case, total elimination, we've left material with your offices. One of them had the attached famous cut chart. In 2000, the Library Foundation program was funded at $57 million. Today, it's at $13 million and proposed for total elimination. The transaction-based reimbursement program has been cut by 40%, and we know of no other programs that have been cut to this extent. So we would strongly urge the committee to reject the governor's proposal of total elimination of these programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you briefly. My name is Jeff Crosby. I am the administrator of the San Joaquin Valley Library System, the very system that the state librarian mentioned in her comments. And what I'd like to talk about specifically is how transaction-based reimbursements allow the San Joaquin Valley Library System to function effectively and assist our clientele. The TBR program is the primary funding source that provides equal access to all Californians. And the San Joaquin Valley Library System has used these funds within our members to greatly facilitate our ability to loan materials and to improve communications within our jurisdiction. We have a 7-county area with 10 public libraries, 113 locations, all of which are on a single telecommunications network that is E-rate funded. We freely loan all of our materials to all of our members at all times. There are no hold fees within the system, and this is all funded by transaction-based reimbursements and some local funding from the members. However, the transaction-based reimbursements and the California Library Services Act funding that we receive would represent a loss, if it's totally eliminated, of almost $1 million to the San Joaquin Valley Library System. It would make it very difficult for our members to continue to serve our communities in the way we are, because 5 of our 10 member libraries are among the 15 poorest funded libraries per capita in the state. We have one library that 2 years ago had a $2 million budget. This coming year, they're looking at a $600,000 budget and will likely have to close 3 of their 5 branches, and that's Madera County. All of our libraries are facing cuts, and there is absolutely no way that any of them are going to be able to come up with the local funding to supplant the TBR funds. And that means they're all going to have to start looking at putting hold fees back in place, perhaps as high as $2 or $3 per request. And many of them are already talking about having to put in non-resident use fees of as much as $100 per library card per person. The TBR funding, if it's removed, will greatly hamper the ability of Californians anywhere in the state from receiving free and open access. I would really encourage you to consider very carefully the fact that this program not be fully eliminated. We've taken cuts. We'll take more.
Thank you. I want to welcome Assemblywoman Julia Brownlee. Thank you for joining us. And then also we have Bill Berryhill joining us as well. And we'll move on with our speakers. If we have, the next 2 speakers who want to join us, that would be perfect. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Jane Light, and I'm the Library Director for the City of San Jose. And I want to urge you not to eliminate the funding for these 3 programs. The elimination of the CLSA funding would result in the destruction of a very successful system of cooperation among public libraries that has existed for over 30 years. And we are so committed to this that even though we've had these enormous cuts to the CLSA program over the last 2 years, the libraries have continued cooperating and sharing our resources without that state funds. But we fear that with no state funding at all, the program will end. And this small investment powers an amazing amount of regional and statewide resource sharing. More than 13 items a year are loaned to residents of cities other than those that are, we call a non-resident. 13 items million items a year.
I was going to say the million was
13 million, yeah. This is interesting that this is true in both the rural areas you just heard and in the urban suburban areas such where I work. The CLSA funds these cooperative library systems across the state, and they allow books and materials to be easily loaned and then transported among our members. And residents of California can use almost any public library in the state free of charge. In the Bay Area, people live in one community, work in another, and probably shop or have a grandma in a third. And they often go to school in a different city than they actually live in. In our area, for example, the joint San Jose State, San Jose Dr. Martin Luther King Library is a building with 2 million items in it, and we serve as the resource and reference for the entire county. And any resident can come and get a card and use all of our resources in the building. Conversely, many of the San Jose residents use the Santa Clara County branches because of the geography of our area and the Santa Clara City Library. Without the reimbursements, the county library may well have to charge an annual fee to non-residents of $80 a year or more. If funding is eliminated for CLSA, I fear we will return to the 1960s. I'm probably the only person here who actually remembers the 1970s in the library world, although even I don't go back to the 60s, when libraries charged annual non-residence fees and often refused to loan items to another library. Children were turned away from their closest library because they happened to live in the wrong city. Public libraries are part of our state's educational infrastructure. Why would we eliminate all funding for the CLSA, the Public Library Fund, and the library literacy programs when over the past 30 years this small amount of state funding has provided such a large return on investment?
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Laura Seaholm, and I'm the program coordinator for the Contra Costa County Libraries Adult Literacy Program, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the California Library Literacy Services Program. These literacy programs target English-speaking adults who read and write at less than a 6th grade level, and in many cases our K through 12 schools either could not or did not help these adults, most of whom have a learning disability such as dyslexia. They have nowhere else to turn for help. Adult schools are not the answer. 84% of our communities are experiencing drastic cutbacks, closures, and in many cases they never provided adult basic education to begin with. The program costs the state just $4.5 million, yet it returns huge dividends. Every dollar of state funds leverages an additional $4 in local and private funds, most of which would not be available without the state money to leverage. In addition, we utilize the services of volunteers. Last year, 12,000 volunteers volunteered more than 825,000 hours. That's $19 million of volunteer time that we've been able to use. We need this important library-based service. It's estimated that 23% of Californians lack basic literacy skills such that they would be unable to fill out a job application. And not surprisingly, there's a very strong correlation between literacy and employment. Only 35% of adults who lack basic literacy skills are employed full-time. $4.5 million is a very wise investment for California because improving literacy makes good economic sense. And 75% of the adults that we serve in our programs are in their prime wage earning years of between ages of 20 and 49. And our programs work. In the last fiscal year, of the adults who set the goal, 59% were able to complete a job application, 45% wrote a resume, 42% interviewed for a job, and 28% secured a job or a promotion. So we ask you to please maintain funding for this program. We change the lives for learners, their families, and frankly for the state of California.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Faye Combs. I'm an adult learner. I'm from the Berkeley Reads in Berkeley, California. I just want to let you know what my struggle was going through the literacy program. I fell through the cracks. I was a push through school. I did graduate with my class, but I was a push through. And for many years, I was able to camouflage that I did not have the skills that I needed to have. I got married, and I have 3 adult children, and in this year I'll be married 50 years to the same man.
Congratulations.
And then my husband, as our children were growing up, would always do their homework. Help them with their homework. I did not know how to fill out applications. When it came time to vote, I did not know how to fill out a ballot. He would fill out the ballots for me, and I would basically just sign the ballots. And so as my children that are adult children, and then I begin to have had grandchildren, I did not want my grandchildren to go through what I thought that I had fooled my children with. So one of my coworkers introduced me to the Richmond Library literacy program, which I started out there, and I'll be ever grateful for them for that. And then I got a job in, then they sent me to college from there, which scared me to death. The only time that I got an A in anything in high school was in physical ed, because that was my passion. But to get an A in college was just an unbelievable thing, and it really brought my self-esteem up and really made me feel good. And so as I got into that, I moved to the Berkeley Reads, where I work in Berkeley. And they had the program, ALLY program, which is called Adult Learner Leader Institute, which I went through that course. I graduated from there. Last year I was a facilitator for that course, which is 6 months. This year I am now a mentor to some new facilitators. I belong to Value, which is Voice for Adult Learners United to Educate, which is the only organization run by adult learners. I became a member, and from there I became the secretary, and now I'm the first president, one lady president. It's a national organization. Last year I had the opportunity to go and do workshops in Alameda County and Contra Costa for the voter guide, which really helped me a great deal, because I now understand what you do, how you do, and how you vote on the things that you do, and why you vote on the things that you do. So it really opened my eyes, and in that class we were able to get some new voters for this last election. And if you may, I'd like to read something from my daughter that she wrote.
Okay.
And it says, as growing up, it says, I remember you're not trying to read, spell, or hard words for years. You would just resign to defeat and ask me or Dad. You would get upset or frustrated when Dad and I would ask you to try to do it for yourself first. Or if we showed you, you wanted us to complete the project instead of learning how to show to learning from what we had showed you. It was continuing to hide and be ashamed of your literacy. Now you're more independent, research information on your own, and write letters and emails, etc. with confidence. You used to always ask someone to read and edit your work, but you rarely do that anymore. Not only do you not hide that you struggle to read and write, but you embrace a past you so artfully hid from the world and your family. Instead of being who you think people expect you to be, I have watched you openly acknowledge your reading and writing difficulties, not insisting that people read your work. You have co-authored 2 books. Imagine that. It would be easy to continue to hide your literacy issues, but instead you tell everyone who will listen and invite them into that part of your life to celebrate your success with you. I know from firsthand experience that telling the truth liberates and frees you and blesses someone else who does not have the courage to do the same thing for themselves as a modern-day hero. You should be proud. Wear your success like a banner, because it will encourage someone else to take their first step. I encourage you, please, 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 not to cut the literacy program.
Thank you.
Those are without jobs. We have no taxes to pay. The economy will go down. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. My name is Angel Nicholas. I am an SEIU 721 member. I am a librarian, and I am a branch manager of a small South Central library called Florence Library. I serve a community that is low income, poverty, with only about 50% of my population working at any one time. We have one of the highest student dropout rates in the nation. Our high schools have a yearly dropout rate of 12%, 8 to 12%. Worst of all, we have gangs, violence, and crime right outside our door. I have a very small library. Florence Library is very small, but we are a well-used and we are a very busy library. With the closures of city libraries, the City of LA libraries, we have had to take in their residents, and we have seen an increase of over 11% in our foot traffic alone. Just to give you an idea, last month in January, our gate count well exceeded over 12,000. A significant amount considering the size of our library is only about the size of this room. Mondays and Tuesday nights, we have teens, children sitting on the floor doing homework, reading. We have lines for our computers for adults to do job searches. We are also a safe zone for teens, children, and adults to come to get away from the gangs and the crime and the violence right outside our door. I try my best. I try my best to provide my community with the limited resources that I have in my small library. Fortunately, however, my library is close by and it's walking distance to LA City libraries. And I've always enjoyed a reciprocal and cooperative agreement and relationship with city libraries for my students and my teens and my children. Oftentimes, I would have to send them to city libraries because I do not have the materials that they need. I send my adults to city libraries sometimes for additional job resources to help them find jobs.
Thank you.
But you're welcome. But the thing is, if you cut the budget, my community cannot use city libraries as resources.
Okay, thank you.
My community cannot afford to lose city libraries as resources. So therefore, I came here today to plead in behalf of my community. I understand and I agree that the budget has to get cut, but please, I beg you, don't cut everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Cindy Singer, and I'm a board member with SEIU 721, and I'm also a branch manager for the Hacienda Heights Library in East San Gabriel Valley. I'm in a similar situation at my library, but we have something that a lot of other libraries don't. We have a Chinese speaker that teaches people to use the computer. This has gone out in the newspapers, and we have people coming in from Ontario and outlying areas just to get this particular service that they don't have at other libraries. If they cut the budget and we can't do reciprocal learning, they won't be able to get a card at my library and they won't be able to use it. And at this point in the afternoons, I have up to 200 children sitting on the floors using the library each and every day. We're open 7 days a week, which is something unusual, and we have people coming in from the city of LA too. So I'm begging you, please don't cut our budget and let us keep helping these people.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker.
Hi, my name is Kirk Thomas Olson. I'm from Ventura County Library. I'm also a member of FCIU. I'm here on behalf of our literacy program, Read Ventura County Library. Our literacy program is totally funded by state grants, and if you do zero out the budget, we will have no literacy program. Last year, we served 500 learners in our community. These are people that would not be able to get a job without literacy skills, and without this literacy program, these people would be out of work and they'd be dependent on public funds for assistance and things like that. So this program is very important. We currently have 4 sites that are active, including one at the California Youth Authority, where people are tutored and there for with their eventual release, so they will have skills upon their release. And elimination of funding, zeroing out this program would eliminate that program, as well as we would have to close our other 3 sites as well. We already had to close a site last year in July because of budgetary cuts, and so we ask that you please do not eliminate the literacy funding and do not zero it out, so that Ventura County may continue to serve the people in its county. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name's Frank Welty, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Governmental Affairs for the California Council of the Blind. As you can imagine, most people who experience sight loss find it to be a traumatic experience. In particular, they find the loss of the ability to read to be particularly painful. Fortunately, since the 1930s, the Library of Congress has provided the books and periodicals in Braille and in audio format to people, hundreds of thousands of Americans who are blind and visually impaired by mail for free. The National Library Service, which currently operates this program, does so in conjunction with a network of cooperating regional libraries throughout the United States. The library for the Northern and Central California region is the Braille and Talking Book Library right down the street here in Sacramento. The value of this service to blind and visually impaired Californians cannot be overstated. Just over the weekend, I received a letter from an individual in Santa Rosa who put it this way: please maintain the California Library, the California Braille and Talking Book Library. It is the chief reason I have for sanity since going blind 7 years ago. And that statement can be repeated thousands upon thousands of times over here in California. Now let me have you imagine something. Imagine if you were to wake up and find that every newspaper, every magazine, every book on your bookshelf, and every public library were suddenly taken away from you. For people who are blind and visually impaired, there is one public library here in California, in Northern and Central California, the Braille and Talking Book Library. If you cut the funding for this one library, it's the equivalent of cutting the funding for every public library in California for the general public. Don't do that. Preserve literacy for the blind and visually impaired citizens of California.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker.
My name is Jeff Tom. Excuse me. Chair Bonilla and members, I am the immediate past president of the California Council of the Blind. Let me give you a brief snapshot of those who receive services from the Braille and Talking Book Library. But before I do that, let me just make one comment about the potential for the loss of funding, even if it's 2 years out. I come from a health and human services background, and I know just how iffy federal waivers can and cannot be. So I implore you not to take the chance of the loss of this program based upon the possibility of a waiver that may not be received. But back to the snapshot. A large percentage of the persons who receive Braille and Talking Book services are elderly. They have suffered recent vision loss, and their window on the world is the books and magazines that they receive from the program. Another substantial percentage are those who are among the 70% or more who are unemployed among the blind and visually impaired population. Today you will hear not only from those who receive those services, but also from those who volunteer to make those services happen on a daily basis. Let me just tell you my story, which is far, far less compelling than those you will hear today, but it does give you an illustration. I recently retired after serving the legislature for over 30 years. If I had not had, as you know, that sort of job is very high stress and long hours. If I had not had the type of stress reduction mechanism that the Braille and Talking Book Library gave me, I'm not sure I would have made it through all those tough times. The Braille and Talking Book Library is an incredible service, and I implore you not to do anything that would jeopardize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Morning.
Morning.
My name is Leslie Tom. I am one of the people that volunteer at the Braille and Talking Book Library every week. If I didn't have that to do and books to read, I don't know what would happen. I've had depression in the past. These books that are available to me have helped greatly. If this program were cut, that would be it for me. I have a child who is visually impaired, and to be able to, for her as well as for myself, to be able to read some of the novels and books that they're assigned reading in school, the only availability for these books and to keep up with class is the state library, because she had, we had to get the books in the format that we could read and that she could read as well. They don't have that anywhere else. The library is the place where we get these services. And if anything were to happen to that, I think education for blind and visually impaired children would have a big, big problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
There it is. Good morning, committee. Dan Kaiser. I'm a library user. And I just want to add on to what Leslie had said, because since 1930, there's been the establishment of this great free mailing system for Braille books. And if you've ever seen a Braille book, it's like, 10 times larger than a regular book. So if you had to charge for that particular item to come to your mailbox, you'd go broke in 1 or 2 books. So they have a free mailing system for the blind for these books. And I would venture to say that if you eliminate this program, you would eliminate the use of Braille. And is that a consequence you want to see as a committee? Do you want to eliminate Braille as a literacy device? Braille is the way that blind people learn how to spell. It's the way that we learn how to put words together. It's the way that we communicate. Deaf-blind people would not be able to function ever again in society if you get rid of Braille. 90% of Braille use is propagated through the library. Do not eliminate Braille in California. You will set us back. I was able to get work because I knew Braille. And 90% of all Braille users who are eligible for work are employed. So please keep Braille. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Martha Zaragoza Diaz, and I'm representing Californians Together and the California Association for Bilingual Education, and I'm speaking to the English Acquisition and Literacy Program. Many of our persons who have finally gotten to the point of becoming somewhat proficient in English use these services to help further develop their English skills, especially in light of the fact that a lot of adult education programs have been eliminated. This is like one of the services they actually use because they work full-time, and the availability of these programs is important to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to our next speaker.
Hi, I'm Audrey Hebner, and I have been blind all my life. I have 2 wonderful, normal sons that I couldn't have gotten along as well as I did raising them if I hadn't had the books to read to them, same as all other parents do. And the interesting part of that was you read this bedtime stories, and then they'll say, read so-and-so. And I would end it with saying, not unless you turn out the lights, then I will read the story. And of course, then before the story was through, they were asleep. Braille is a wonderful thing. I use it for cookbooks and all kinds of things. Like any other housewife, I have to have the information to run my house. I need that Braille, and I hope you never have to use it, most of you, but it's valuable to us. What would you do if you didn't have a pencil and some paper? How would you remind yourself? We need those same tools, and that's what when we learn Braille, that's what we can accomplish. It makes us more independent than you'll ever know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move to our next speaker.
My name is Deborah Thompson, and I'm the president of our local chapter from the California Council for the Blind. And we have deafblind members of our council, and they would have no access to Braille or anything else if this library did not exist. And for me, I'm one of the 30% of blind people who's actually employed, and I am a Braille user, and I base my ability to be employed on the fact that I do read Braille and that I can utilize that in what I do and how I work. So please do not eliminate the libraries.
Thank you. And our next speaker. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Berman, and I have been a California State Braille and Talking Book Library user for about 50 years now. Without that resource, I never would have made it through junior high, let alone high school, let alone college. We don't have the same resources available to us that sighted people do. We can't walk into the school library and use it. When we research for a paper, it has more to do with going through lots and lots and lots of Braille and cassette and talking books to find the information that we need. The other thing is that even textbooks are not readily available, so you have to look for what you're going to need. This resource is invaluable to anybody who is visually impaired or blind. It is something we cannot afford to lose. I don't think we will, but in all fairness, we have to say that taking it away would be taking away the window to life. For many people, don't do it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and speaking today. I believe that's our last public comment on this issue, and with that, I'll bring it back to the committee for comments before we move on to the rest of our agenda. Mr. Swanson.
Yep. Madam Chair, let me just say that our job is not easy at this point, but I have to say that it is quite frustrating that when a rationale is presented that the reason for this particular cut and other cuts that are presented before the committee is simply that we're trying to balance the budget without any substantive analysis of the impact, it makes our job that much harder. I believe that fundamentally to our democracy, the ability to read, the opportunity to read is at the top. It is clearly fundamental. Many of the libraries and library budget items that I've seen over recent years, we have cut 40 to 50% of our assistance to libraries. We've been going absolutely in the wrong direction, and the role of libraries in the communities have grown substantially. I was part of a dedication of a library in my district just this past weekend on 85th Avenue. It took 10 years to build this facility. It is a part of a community institution in a very troubled part of town, providing our kids with clearly positive alternatives to non-productive activity. But 400 families showed up to participate in this opening because the library is providing a resource that is very valuable at this time of need in the community. You can go to the library, you can get online, you can take out videos and the most popular videos you can take out. There's opportunities for the kids in peer sessions to participate, and so the library it's not a question of just simply book availability, although I think that is fundamental to our democracy. They are becoming safe zones, and many of the statements made here were echoed at the opening, where we actually negotiate with gangs in the area to stay away from the library and to allow kids to learn, those that want to learn, while we address the gang problem. But these facilities are serving that purpose. And so where I would argue that we need to be putting more money into libraries at this time because they can have such a return on the economic argument that right now, if we were to eliminate state funding and ability to match federal dollars, then the $20 million that we get from the federal government last year would not be there. But if we argue to the federal government that we need to put more money into libraries, then California would not be a participant. And so I just think that every dollar is not the same. Every cut is not the same. There are consequences in real cash match, and then there are consequences to not having a facility where our kids don't have the alternative. And in this case, we're talking about kids and adults and literacy that will suffer. And I just don't think the analysis has been done. But because it hasn't been done doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and it shouldn't be calculated into our analysis. And so I think we have an obligation. I understand time is important here and people trying to move quickly, but we can't move so quickly that we destroy institutions, bring down infrastructure that are necessary for us to really participate in learning and building our educational environment. And that's why I think that these cuts should not stand.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Swanson said it very eloquently, and I concur with his comments. I just, part of our goal here relative to this budget is to the degree that we're able to protect the safety net for Californians, and clearly literacy programs and having access to them, and these are people who want to help themselves and that come and join these programs for very little cost by the state. And hearing from the blind and having the tools of Braille and providing them the ability to be productive citizens and work in California, to remove that seems inhumane. And then the whole notion of this CLSA program and the governor's budget, as is the literacy program, would be to eliminate these programs. And testimony has stated that if they were eliminated, that libraries up and down the state are talking about charging for library cards to $70 to $100. That's a line I just don't want to cross. And I think that the ACLU is suing school districts up and down the state for charging to participate in athletic programs and other kinds of things. So for the state of California and library system to have to charge for a library card just seems like a very dangerous path for us to go down. So I hope that as we wrestle with this whole budget, that we can figure out ways in which not to make further reductions to the libraries. And everyone who's come into my office even after having very significant cuts made, have all been willing to say, we want to be part of the solution. We understand that you're going to have to cut us some, but don't eliminate across the board programs. And so I hope that we can partner with them and figure that out. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Comment?
Yes. To date, this agenda item was scheduled. I received 100 letters from my district saying the same thing. And the point that I think we have to make about the entire budget as we go to our budget seminars and try to figure out is that what is fair, what is fair, what is proportional, and when we talk about total elimination, then it doesn't appear that everyone is carrying their fair share of burden here. And I think that's how we have to revisit this budget question. I haven't heard one group come before us and say that we're not willing to sacrifice and make adjustments and try to figure out what's reasonable. They're doing it every day, and local communities are raising additional monies to fund additional services in their libraries and in their schools. But that requires us to look at the entire budget and to be fair about how we try to balance it, and then go to the public and say, with this fair attempt, in addition to the additional $12 billion that we need, we think you should support that because this is what we're funding. But if we're eliminating total programs and then finding that the impact on the working poor and on families that are trying to make it, they're hit several ways.
Right. From
child care to libraries to no support of after-school programs and the like, then we're doing a terrible disservice.
Thank you. Assemblymember Berry Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate very much Member Swanson's passion and comments on this. I too, the libraries do provide a tremendous resource for those who might not otherwise be able to afford. But even for those that can, I think back to when my kids were growing up, and we took them on a regular basis to the city library to be able to, just generates that excitement and that love of reading when you take them to a library, and they are a very important resource to get kids excited about reading, and to those kids then become great readers, they become great students, and they become a great future for our state. And it's an area that I too hesitate to see the cuts. I am curious though on a couple areas. Assemblymember Monning and myself are working together on trying to capture some of the lost tax revenues in the underground economy, and doing it, trying to develop new techniques, new ways of doing it with the same amount of money. And sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. We think we've identified some in that case. I'm curious with the public libraries, how was the Public Library Foundation, prior to the Public Foundation, how were the local libraries funded before that?
Do we have an answer? Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and members. Mike Dillon, representing the California Library Association. Mr. Berryhill, before Proposition 13, there were about 26 of the large county libraries. There were some small ones in there, and about 11 special district libraries that were primarily dependent on the property tax, and those were property taxes that people had approved years ago that were dedicated for the libraries. The other county libraries and the city libraries had general funds from all types of sources. And so after Proposition 13, when the libraries got hit so hard, then Senator Jim Nielsen carried a bill to establish the Public Library Foundation program. We tried to set it so it was a 40-60, 40% state, 60% local match. When we finally got it through, it was a 10% state, 90% local match, and it's never been fully funded. Yeah. Today, to fully fund it would be about $107 million. It's down to $13 million, as you know.
With the idea of realignment and potentially doing away with RDAs and those property tax revenues coming back to at the local level. Do you see any light there as a possible funding source at the local level?
Well, we've thought about it, Mr. Berryhill, and we've had a few conversations with some folks. The difficulty is that if you view the Library Services Act, this loan sharing program, and the literacy as more of a state program, it's hard to realign. Some libraries have literacy programs, some do not, and some are loan more books, if you will, than others. And so it's hard to, unless you took whatever they're getting now and somehow folded that into realignment. So we're looking at it, but we think it would be kind of difficult.
One last question. When we lose federal funding, it's based on a the previous 3-year average. So it runs out in, 2014, 2015. If the economy were to pick up by then, say 14, 15, we're able to fully fund, would you have the same level of federal funding that you had before? You just lost a few years. How does that work?
We'll ask our state librarian to speak to that. Thank you.
There we go.
Good morning, Stacey Aldridge, state librarian. What happens is we get a federal grant every year for 2 years, and we have to report in the third year how we spent that money, or actually at the end of the second year. For 2 years, that's 3 state budget cycles for us. That's 24 months. And so this coming year in 2011, we'll be able to report that we are meeting our match. But coming next year is when we start to show that we can't meet the match. So we lose, because of the way the funding is structured, we start reporting next year that we can't start meeting it starts to cut into our budget.
Yes, so even if we came back in 14, 15, you're not going to have the federal piece of it.
Right. Well, we would still be behind because of the 3 budget cycles.
Right. Take you 2 years of funding it and to get any federal monies.
Yes.
No. Okay. Thanks.
If I could, Mr. Berryhill, just 40 years of lobbying now. This program is so important. Some of the libraries librarians almost lay down and die for this program. It's that important, as Mr. Swanson was saying, this resource sharing. And so to gamble and risk losing it now and never having it restored we think would be terrible. But thank you very much, Madam Chair and members, for all your time today. We know you've been very, very gracious, and we certainly appreciate it on behalf of everybody here today.
Thank you. Well, we certainly appreciate the very good public participation, and when we consider this issue and how they're all interrelated around the issue of literacy, I too was at a small community library opening. We already see in our communities that the resourcefulness and partnerships that are being built, public and private, was within a community center, very small in terms of the space, but relying directly on the fact that they would be able to access all the other library materials outside of the city of Antioch and bring them in. A comment that was made by the library folks earlier was that we have one library with 1,000 doors. And really, certainly, we don't want to see those doors closing, particularly in the areas where the need is the greatest and where we would see that impact come first. So I am encouraged to hear all the public comment, the comments of our committee members, and again, coming back in agreement with what's been said before by our committee members. It is really incumbent on us, I think, to carry out this principle of a balanced approach that the governor himself has stated. We're looking at cuts, we're looking at revenues, but even within the cuts, I think we want to see that principle of being balanced and fair carried out as we analyze where these cuts will be made, and really knowing that there will be, as we're reminded frequently, there will be negative impacts. We can't avoid the negative impacts, but can we avoid devastation? Yes, and I think that's what our job is to say that we know, and everyone knows, there is this sense of a willingness to sacrifice, as you said, Mr. Swanson. But the elimination of a program, the devastation of what that means within some of our most highly impacted communities is something I think that we need to guard against. And so thank you very much. We're not going to be taking action today, but we certainly will be taking this under consideration, and at our final hearing, we'll be making our recommendations and taking action at that time. Thank you very much. We'll be moving on in our agenda now. And I would invite our presenters from the Department of Finance, the California Department of Education, and the Legislative Analyst's Office to come and join us now. All right, thank you very much. We will be asking you to shift your places to be facing the front here as you are giving your report, but we're glad to have you join us. So we'll be beginning with the Department of Finance. Okay, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance.
Hey, Chris, thanks for being here.
The
And we're looking at the governor's proposal for the categorical program flexibility. Thank you.
Yes. The governor's budget proposes to extend the education flexibility provisions enacted as part of the 2008 and 2009 budget agreements by an additional 2 years. For many of these programs, that means extending the flexibility through the 2014-15 fiscal year.
Is that the report?
That's the general overview.
Okay. All right. We'll move on now to the Legislative Analyst's Office, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good morning. Jim Soland, Legislative Analyst's Office, and just to provide a little more context on all of this, we have a handout that should have made its way around at this point, but as you may know, our office has been administering a survey to school districts the past couple of years, including this one, and so I'm going to provide an overview on that survey, some of the findings, and talk about the recommendations we've made on the basis of that survey. So just looking at page 1 of the handout, our office, as I mentioned, has distributed a survey to all school districts in California, and it's essentially asking them about some of the big picture issues related to not only flexibility but finance more broadly. So, for example, asking them about one-time federal funding, deferrals, categorical flexibility, and other flexibility provisions relating to things like the length of the school year. We had a really good response rate. This year we had 382 districts out of 1,000 respond, 8 out of the 10 largest, and about 58% of the ADA in the state. So a good response. It's reflective of the state, and we've thanked them informally, but just to give a quick formal thanks to all the districts that participated, it's been really valuable. And at the bottom of the page, there's obviously a table showing sort of a demographic comparison of the respondents that we got compared to the state as a whole. So turning to page 2, given that the state has had 2 primary avenues for trying to reduce the impact of we're trying to make sure that districts can maintain programmatic spending. 2 options available have been to send out federal funding to the field and to implement programmatic deferrals. So we asked school districts about these 2 issues. On the federal funds piece, it looks like about 75% of districts are using the federal funds they've received to support teacher salaries, which is commensurate with the intent of the federal funds. A lot of districts are also using federal funds to backfill cuts to categorical programs, especially for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act stimulus dollars. And then finally, just a piece that may help you with your deliberations for the coming year. We found that about 2/3 of total ed jobs, this is the federal funding to help support education jobs, teacher salaries, about 2/3 of that money is being reserved for 2011-12. So districts are holding on to it by and large. On the deferral piece, not a whole lot of surprise in terms of how districts are responding to those. They're starting by draining reserves, which is, in essence, internal borrowing. Some districts are borrowing either externally or by going to their counties in some fashion. And As far as deferrals that were implemented before this year, we found that about a fifth of districts were responding to deferrals by making cuts. Just rather than building program in the year, they decided they would just reserve the funding for later years and not build program. What we found that was interesting in this area is if you ask them about a new budget deferral in the coming year, the percentage of districts that would respond with a cut rises to almost 50%. So districts would clearly be accommodating a deferral in a slightly different way should a new one be enacted. There are different conclusions that can be drawn from that information, certainly, but it's worth bearing in mind as you consider options going forward. Turning to page 3, the state obviously recognizing that those two options wouldn't be enough to completely mitigate cuts, provided flexibility in a number of areas, one of the primary ones being categorical flexibility. And we found a couple of overarching things from our survey. One is just that the vast majority of districts have really relied on flexibility and have found that it's made it easier to adopt a strategic plan, focus funding on local needs, and balance their budgets. Districts are also, not surprisingly, taking more advantage of some of the flexibility, and that could mean either shifting funds from categorical programs or eliminating the programs altogether. And if you turn to page 4, we have a figure that demonstrates responses on categorical programs that are being eliminated at the local level and comparing the current year to the prior year. So in some cases you see programs with pretty high percentages that are being eliminated and even higher percentages in the current year. You also see some changes, relatively lower percentages total, but big changes compared to last year in some programs like alternative credentialing and CalSafe. And just one caveat here is that although some districts may be eliminating the programs as they appeared in the original categorical program form, we also heard from districts that flexibility has made it easier for them to target money to at-risk students. So it could be that they're achieving some of these goals in a slightly different way. It's hard to say based on the information that we have. Turning to page 5, districts are also relying more heavily on other flexibility provisions and requesting more flexibility. So what we're seeing is that a lot of school districts are relying on options like reducing the length of the school year. We found that 50% of the districts that responded to our survey anyway were reducing the school year by 1 day or more. Increasing class sizes, so you're seeing elementary class sizes going from about 21 to 25 on average. Instituting furlough days. About half of districts said they'd be doing that in the current year, and reducing health benefits in some way or contributions to those benefits. With all of these changes and the degree to which districts have been relying on flexibility, we've also seen that most districts wanted not only more flexibility for some of the standalone categorical programs that are still on the books, but much more flexibility. So, for example, districts overwhelmingly wanted much more flexibility on things like K-3 class size reduction, economic impact aid, Quality Education Investment Act dollars, and so high percentages and increasing percentages year over year. So based on what we learned from our survey, we made several recommendations for how to respond to all of this information going forward, and that's in a little table on page 6. And so we really came at this in 2 different ways. First was sort of immediate options that you have as part of this budget discussion to increase flexibility and provide more latitude for districts to balance their budgets. We also have recommendations for long-term improvements to the finance system, but just a few examples of short-term options you have available to you. There are additional programs that could have their strings cut that we feel wouldn't have a huge impact on at-risk students, such as K-3 class size reduction and home-to-school transportation. There's also the possibility of removing strings from the after-school education and safety program by repealing Proposition 49. More generally, right now the flex item is just allocated to districts based on the proportion that they received in prior years rather than being related in any way to the actual students they serve. We recommend, even if you're just thinking about this in the short term, tying the flex item in some way to average daily attendance so it's more reflective of the needs of districts. In addition, eliminating more mandated activities, we've talked about that before. Easing restrictions on contracting out for non-instructional services, and easing restrictions regarding pay rates and priority for substitute teaching positions. I'm happy to answer questions about any of those if you'd like. But moving ahead, we also, thinking about what comes next, obviously categorical flexibility will sunset eventually. And we recommend, rather than extending flexibility, trying to make lasting improvements to the K-12 finance system, specifically focusing funding on revenue limits and a few a few block grants. For instance, some studies have recommended really just focusing funding on revenue limits, funding for at-risk students in special education, and that's one option that might have merit. In addition to making this sort of long-term and lasting improvement to the system, we think that there are opportunities to consider the role of the State Department of Education in relation to the finance system. So if we really are going to go to a long-term, more flexible system, also looking at ways to move the department away from compliance monitoring and focus more on some of the broader outcomes monitoring that the system would be based on. So looking at things like data, accountability, and dissemination of best practices. So that in a nutshell is what we learned from our survey, what our recommendations are based on that survey, and happy to respond to questions.
Just to begin our questions, in light of the context that we're dealing with this budget and realignment, how do you see your recommendations, your longer range recommendations, lining up with that in terms of a principle that we're pursuing long range with how we handle our budget?
Well, in terms of a specific interaction, I'm not sure that there would be, beyond what you've already discussed, sort of specific fiscal impacts. I think in general, conceptually, the two ideas dovetail, which is to provide flexibility on the local level to meet local needs and to respond to the needs of their students specifically. And we've tried to make recommendations that would provide a system where you are making sure that the state is still providing services to at-risk students, but also maximizing the flexibility the districts have to provide those services.
Yes, Assemblymember Brownlee, do you have comments? Yes, Mr.
Yeah, very much appreciate the LAO's look at all this. One of the things that I think is important to consider is when you give flexibility, how long you give it for. I mean, you'll have some that'll say just do away with it and that'll be it. School districts, from what I've heard, the ones I've heard from, they will tell you they need at least 5 years. When you're going to cut the strings, give them at least 5 years because they got to ramp up to do it. And then if it's only a 2-year period, it's just a big nightmare. Then you got to go back. So, I mean, I think that's that time frame on how long you cut these strings is very important. I think the idea of realignment with what the governor's philosophy is, right, going forward, and letting the locals do what they know to do best, and define that role, which in your last deal here, refocus CDE's mission on data accountability and dissemination of best practice. That's what the state needs to do. So I very much appreciate that as well. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
All right. With that, we'll move on to Erin Gable and her report from the California Department of Education. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Erin Gable on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. These flexibility provisions have helped school districts to cope with the devastating budget actions that have needed to be taken over the last 3 years. And the State Superintendent does appreciate the administration's proposal to continue to extend this flexibility. It is going to be very difficult for local education agencies to come out of flex without the infusion of new unrestricted dollars. And that, of course, is unlikely to occur until our budget situation overall improves. And so the superintendent would like to underscore that it's appropriate at this time to discuss an extending of the provisions for local education agencies because they are required to put together a budget that is for the current year and for 2 years out. And so having some certainty and not changing midstream in terms of flexibility does have benefits in that arena. On behalf of the superintendent and the State Board of Education, I want to encourage the legislature and the governor to start talking now about what the plan is going to be for exiting what's affectionately called as flex. If we're going to have a long-term plan to learn from what went well and what did not go well with the categorical flexibility, and to look at the long-term implications of that in terms of school finance reform. Now would be the time to start those conversations in order to give school districts enough time to plan, prepare, and to budget if we are going to be departing from flex at some point. The superintendent and the state board president believe that this budget crisis and flex experiment provides an opportunity to rethink our school finance systems holistically. And we've started developing ideas in coordination with members of the legislature and look forward on working on that this year. And also, just echoing the comments of Assemblymember Berryhill, ensuring that we do provide school districts with enough time to plan and ramp up if there is going to be a shift in policy, whether that be budgetarily here or policy-wise in the long term. And specifically, the department does have comments on one of the provisions of the flex extension, and that's regarding to the school district budget reserves. The department is concerned that this provision is concerned about the idea that this provision would be extended. The provision actually does not make any additional funds available at the local level or make it more flexible. What it does is merely deactivate our early warning system to let us know when our school districts have gone into fiscal and financial trouble. So now more than ever, state leadership and the public need to know quickly when our school districts are dipping into their reserves, when we've pushed them to their financial limits, and we believe that because of that, the school district budget reserve warning system should be reinstated. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Ms. Gable regarding Proposition 49 and the recommendation here to actually repeal it, because I know in an earlier conversation we had talked when we were talking about childcare that maybe Proposition 49 could be used in a more flexible manner. So as a recommendation, so we can't use the money, 4 different ways. So I just would like you to speak a little bit on in a response to repealing this, or do you see any flexibility that could be worked around Proposition 49, and then would it be a recommendation to direct that more towards childcare, or I would assume repealing it would just bring that money into school districts?
State Superintendent Tom Torlakson is adamantly opposed to a repeal of Proposition 49. He believes that there is some flexibility within the statute to work on areas where we could be enhancing the programs or providing more flexibility, such as in the instance of the potential of eliminating childcare for 11 and 12-year-olds and trying to find ways of accommodating those students within after-school programs. And those are areas that we are encouraging the legislature to explore, and that the department is happy to be supportive of on a technical level to help get there. But the superintendent feels very strongly about the access to these high-quality after-school programs, and so the repeal of those probably would not go over very well with the public, and so to count on that for a budgeting standpoint would not be advisable, whereas perhaps looking within the existing program for statutory changes that we might be able to do, he would be supportive of doing that.
And just one more question. When we were talking about the flexibility, I think it's important to remember it's not giving anyone extra dollars. We're not sending more money. I'd like a little more background on how we would link it to average daily attendance to students and what the benefits of that would be, and if that's something we need to be considering in this before we extend it for a number of years. Do we need to make that change now? And then also putting in a provision that would somehow give us information back on the results of the flexibility. One of the reasons we didn't have flexibility was the fact that we wanted certain performance goals met, certain students served, and one way to achieve that was to say this money must be spent in this category. So we've removed that, and some people might say, well, dire predictions that there'd be real inequities, and maybe students wouldn't be served. And we really need to know whether there's a negative consequence out there, or maybe perhaps not. Maybe the local level, the school boards are being responsive to their constituency and not devastating programs that would be very, very unpopular within their local communities. So I think it's very important that we have some, and I appreciate the survey information, but I think as part of flexibility, and I'm not trying to load on extra reporting requirements, onto school districts, but just to be able to make a good decision going forward, I think we must know what the results are of flexibility beyond letting them balance their budget,
Absolutely. I think that the superintendent would agree that the reason why these categoricals were put into place is because the programmatic intent behind them it's very important. And so to have an understanding of what not only the benefits of the flexibility have been from a budgetary perspective, but what the actual program outcomes have been and the impact on the students that were intended to be served by those programs, or the enhancements to other programs like staff development that were intended, what the true impact of those have been. And the department would be happy to support the legislature in finding a way to create some sort of reporting mechanism that's not burdensome for school districts, but at the same time gives us a clear understanding of what's happening. It's going to be hard to find that balance.
And I think it would support other attempts to bring about real finance reform, because it will inform that process as well. If we're looking at more cleaner lines going forward in terms of funding, that would be very important information to have. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, make mention why we're on this discussion is that this is school finance reform is an area that I've been interested in and have worked in my years in the legislature, and introduced a bill at the beginning of session this year, AB 18, and have been working closely with the superintendent as well as the president of the state board on this issue, and looking forward to having some hearings later on to kind of drill down more in this area. But I agree with what you're saying, is that some of this information would be helpful in terms of the decisions we have to make in the next 30 to 40 days, whatever the time frame is at the moment. Thank you for those inquiries. And I did just, have one question relative to the LAO's report, and it has to do with the deferrals, and that we've gone from roughly 1 in 5 districts now making cuts to roughly half of the districts would make cuts if the deferrals for 11, 12 are there. Do we have a sense of what districts are they? Are they large districts? Are they small districts? Are they urban districts? Are they rural districts? Is it equally spread? Do you have any sense of what kind of district is being most impacted?
We didn't do a detailed data analysis, at least not in the context of the survey, although we certainly could try and look at the data specifically from that standpoint. I mean, my understanding is that in general, larger districts do have an easier time borrowing internally, certainly. So they, I think, in general might have an easier time facilitating some of these deferrals, but that's just a very broad comment. But
well, I think that's important information. If we can, dig that out, it's important. But, there's no question what this is telling us. It's telling us, I think, what we already knew, but this is a big warning sign that these deferrals, while we don't score them as cuts, are having a tremendous impact on school districts relative to them making cuts and reducing programmatic services. So while it's been a necessary tool, I guess, it's one that I think that we need to be conscious of during this process. And I know the governor in his budget proposal has tried to safeguard K through 12 education because of the $17 billion worth of cuts that school districts have already taken, and the deferrals proposed are having, we really do need to understand what those impacts are, and what districts are being impacted more, and if we are going to do these deferrals, are there any other policy or programmatic ideas that we can lend to districts to help mitigate some of this fiscal pressure that they have, and so I just think that we need to pursue that. Do I know if there are any answers like that of things that we could provide school districts that are that don't cost money, but to help them with borrowing or other kinds of things? I don't know, but if there are, I think we need to have them on the table.
Just for clarification on the deferral, has there been any new information about the length of any new deferrals that are being proposed, or is it what was originally still the original proposal? And then I had asked that one question about tying the flex funding to ADA. Could you elaborate on what is being done now and what your suggestion would actually accomplish, and if it's hard to do it, or is it fairly straightforward?
Sure. Well, so the general idea is right now the flex item is just being allocated to districts on the basis of whatever they got proportionally in prior years, either 2007, 8, or 8, 9, depending on the program. So it could be that you've seen a district that has pretty significant changes in enrollment or within specific subpopulations, and the flex item's currently totally unresponsive to those changes. And so what we're essentially recommending is you figure out sort of what the pot of money is in the current year and divide it by average daily attendance to get some kind of per pupil rate, so that going forward, if you see a district that has increased enrollment, so more students to serve from one of these programs, that they would see an increase in funding and vice versa. And so it has a couple of advantages. I mean, the first is, again, just in the short term, that it is actually at least a little bit more responsive to student needs and the needs in the district. And then long term, too, if you really are thinking seriously about finance reform, I think it's going to make sure that the transition is just a little bit smoother, because if you are going to have some sort of system that's based more on revenue limits or categorical block grants or a weighted student formula, whatever direction you wanted to go in, already having that shift in enrollment built into the system is going to ease that transition.
And would that be would the transition of doing that in this budget present obstacles or finance issues for districts that are perhaps have already done calculations based on the prior year amount? I mean, is it going to throw into confusion? Would it be something, maybe if we're looking at extending this over years, that maybe we would give them a year to do that, or is it something that actually would be a benefit to schools to do it with this budget cycle? Because we don't want to institute something that then will, again, have a negative impact.
Sure. I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways to think about it. Certainly, there could be some districts that assume they would get the same proportion that wouldn't anymore. And I think you could think about this in the very near term. But by the same token, the districts that wouldn't be receiving as much money are likely the ones who have seen lower enrollment, and so presumably wouldn't need quite the same proportion as they might have otherwise. So, I mean, it's certainly a complicated issue, but one that you could be thinking about in the near term.
Well, and certainly need, they need every dollar they can get. So I'm sure that wouldn't be how those districts would feel about it, that they don't need that.
Sure. Right. And that's the issue, is you could certainly see, districts that might be losing some of the funding. You could also see some districts that are serving even more students than they were before, and their resources are stretched even thinner. So, I mean, clearly it's a balancing act, but just a decision to make.
So Jennifer Kuhn from the Ledger Analyst Office, just to add a little bit more detail. So you do have statewide K-12 ADA now projected to grow, and you do have now half of the districts out there. We're working on more refined estimates, but roughly, that are growing. So this is the least disruptive way to have a system that is at least connected to students. So districts essentially get what they got last year, and then we just have they have their own per pupil rate. Some districts will have very high rates and some will have lower rates. but it'll just adjust in 11-12 on the margin based upon their changes in student counts. So growing districts will get more based upon the additional students they serve. Declining enrollment districts will get less. But again, it's on the margin. You could be a district that's declining but has very high rates, and you continue to get your very high rate. You just get slightly less because you serve fewer students. So we still think it's the most rational way to have a system for moving forward. Just one other comment on the deferral, because there was some trailable language that the administration introduced last week. And although it's only placeholder language, it does structure the deferral to move from July to July, meaning it would move from July of 2012 to July of 2013. So you, as opposed to a deferral as we traditionally have thought about it, where you're moving payments from late in a fiscal year to early in the next fiscal year, you're now moving money, you're talking 12, 13 months. So it would be the longest span deferral the state has ever contemplated. Now, again, it's trailer building. It's placeholder. So it could be that conversations are occurring with the state and cash flow at the state level and whether that could be shortened. But right now it's structured to be quite long. Finally, on the programmatic side, it's very difficult for districts to report program outcomes at this point because the state has removed the strings, the audit, the reports associated with them. What we can do is look at student achievement in the aggregate and by subgroup and see if it's been affected. It'll be a difficult story. It's always been a difficult story in California because there's so many programs. It's hard to say, well, that caused this great improvement or that caused the decline. But we do have the information. That at least we can do without districts even bearing any more administrative burden.
Oh, that sounds like an excellent, yes.
Question. On the districts with declining enrollment, we, based on all of these cuts that we've made to schools, but declining enrollment, still they get a one-year sort of grace period for transitional purposes?
Yes, they can take the higher of either the current or the prior year. And the cost for declining enrollment has been going down dramatically because fewer districts are experiencing declining enrollment.
And can we just get clarification on the deferral, the 12-month versus what we had originally?
Again, as Jennifer stated, that's placeholder language. We're actively working with the Department of Education in regards to the deferral time frame.
Okay. That's right. We're making you face this way.
That's okay. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Jeff Bell from the Department of Finance, and for just a little additional clarification, that was in reference to the dollar amount being the same. So when I was looking over at you and saying the same, it was in reference to the dollar amount.
Okay.
So just as an additional piece of clarification.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, we just want to keep that all clear. All right. We'll move on to our next item. As I said at the beginning, we do have a lot of new folks in our audience. We're going to cover all items and then go to public comment at that point in time. Any other comments? All right, let's move on.
I was going to say they're all fortunate that you have a seat because, when we're talking about education, we go to our schools and our universities and sometimes there aren't any seats.
Very true, very true. All right, next, the governor's proposal for K-3 class size reduction program. Again, who do we have giving the Department of Finance? Would you like to move to the front table? Thank you. We'll do all five together at the end. Good.
Hello again. Jeff Bell from the Department of Finance. Issue 2 in the agenda this morning highlights the K-3 class size reduction program. It indicates that the governor's proposal does show a $1.27 billion for the program. It also highlights the flexibility for the program and that it is budgeted in an item. It shows that that recently the Department of Education has highlighted a deficit in the program. If I could just briefly address that, we would note that the estimate that has been provided is an early estimate of the program. There's a number of factors that will affect education funding throughout the year. We will take a look at the overall education funding as events transpire throughout the remainder of the fiscal year, we will look at this in consideration of the overall budget and address it accordingly. So as we look at class size reduction, we'll look at it in the overall context of the education budget. We recognize that that is an early estimate. Class size reduction will have a final estimate at the end of the fiscal year. That will be, I believe, in July, and we will take a look at that at the end of the fiscal year as well. But this is a preliminary estimate. We recognize that factor, and we will take a look at it in the overall context of the budget then.
So it wouldn't be the governor's intent for there to be a shortfall once all the numbers would be accurately or reported in July?
What we would intend is that we would look at class size reduction in the intent of the overall education budget. We would see that in the context of the remaining education programs. We will look for savings wherever we can in education financing. We recognize that programs throughout the education budget will move up and down. After all, it's part of a very large education budget, and that's a $43 million shortfall that could occur. It could move up or down throughout the remaining months, and we will take a look at that in the overall context of the budget.
Okay. Jim, are you giving the report?
Sure. Just as we mentioned in the previous item, our recommendation is primarily to include K3 CSR in the flex item, which would certainly alleviate these particular issues that you're addressing. Now, clearly, if you wanted to go a different route than some of the issues, including the Prop 98 shortfall, if the Department of Ed were to certify the K3 CSR amounts, it would be an issue to deal with. But in general, our recommendation is to include CSR in the flex item.
Currently, what's the formula that's used? Because there has been some relaxing of the standards. So your proposal would just basically say there wouldn't have to be any reduction in class size, and the schools would still get the categorical funding they've received in the past. Currently, what is the standard?
Well, the standard is essentially, I mean, in terms of the penalties.
Yes.
So originally, and there's a very nice chart in the agenda that lays this out, but it used to be that there were pretty steep penalties as soon as you got even around 21, 22 students. For CSR, for example, you would forfeit your entire amount if you got to 22 students on average in the class over the course of the year. At this point, you can have 25 or more students, and the maximum penalty is 30%. So really, the incentives have been pretty dramatically reduced to actually decrease class sizes. And I think the other issue here, too, is that districts have had the number of participating classes capped at a prior year rate. I think it was as of January 1st, 2009. And so even that additional incentive of the more classes you can have, reducing class sizes, the better, is no longer factored into the program. So as we see it, just generally speaking, given all the money and the change in the penalty structure, it's really in some ways tenuously linked to the original policy goal of having 20 or fewer students. And for those reasons, we recommend including it in the flex item.
Ms. Gable.
So the Department of Education has made current year payments based off of the statutory provisions that were just discussed for the class size reduction. And it turns out that our payments, which Jeff had alluded to, are $43.3 million higher than the Department of Finance has identified in the budget calculations for this purpose. So presumably this is a hole that will have to be covered in some fashion. Similarly, for the budget year, we've estimated based off the applications we've received so far that the payments will be $41.9 million higher than what the Department of Finance has set aside for the budget year. We'd also like to note that cuts to the program previously have resulted in underfunding of the program in 2009-2010 in the amount of $48.6 million, and that the department has basically applied this cut proportionately to all grantees.
Thank you. Any questions? No? No.
And just the final comment I might make is we would encourage you moving forward to not, what happened in the current year was that the state made a decision for the first time ever to continuously appropriate funds for the program, which means what's happening in the current year is costs are more than you budgeted, and you're just experiencing that cost. Now, at this point, you could go in right now, find something else that costs $43 million and cut it. That's your option. Or you've spent more than you otherwise intended. So, and that's happening. And nobody's offered any solution to you at the table. So we would suggest when you build your 11-12 budget that you put the program, like every other program apart from revenue limits, you put in the Budget Act. This allows you to control funding and to make decisions as you go throughout the year. If there are cost overruns, you can consider it, knowing that there are some trade-offs and that something else has to give.
So how do you do that? Because, I mean, how do schools don't know what their projections and their enrollment is, and I mean, if we were going to follow a particular formula relative to this, I mean, how do you do that?
Well, because all these programs are connected to the minimum guarantee, what you typically do, again, with every other, apart from ballot measures, every other K-12 categorical program is you figure out what you want to provide for it. In the past, for K-3, it was something like $1.8 billion. And then if additional ADA were served and there wasn't enough, the department could run a deficiency letter and you could come before you and you could figure out if you wanted to provide the additional resources, or CDE would prorate the per pupil amounts downward. So you do have tools to accommodate the projection. Every other program is a projection as well, and every other program can also run deficiencies or have prorations downward. It just allows you not to necessarily spend more in the aggregate on Prop 98, which not only affects that year, but can affect the next year and into perpetuity. So it's one way that the state can control total spending for K-14 education.
Thank you, and thank you for that information. I appreciate it. Moving on to the next, special education, special disabilities adjustment. And we'll begin with the Department of Finance.
Lisa Merzinski with the Department of Finance. Our special education budget this year, I'm sure you're aware, includes one major reduction for the elimination of the special disabilities adjustment for $74 million. And then the remainder of them were pretty much baseline adjustments, and I don't know if you want me to get into those or not.
I think if we have questions, we'll come back to that, but let's move on to the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Thank you. Good morning. Rachel Ehlers, LAO. So just as a way of short background, I think your agenda lays it out pretty well, but the Special Disabilities Adjustment was created when the state changed the way we funded special education to move to a census-based model, where instead of funding each special ed student that a district identified, we instead fund districts based on their total ADA. And assume that there's a uniform number of special ed students across all districts. This was an attempt to avoid creating fiscal incentives for districts to identify kids as special ed. But at the time, there was a belief that there were certain areas that had perhaps higher concentrations of higher cost, more severe, low incidence disabilities. So this special disabilities adjustment, this add-on, was created. This was back in the late 90s. We haven't updated the formula since then. So the SELPAs that got this special disabilities adjustment back in 1997 are continuing to get this now 13 years later based on the students they were serving 13 years ago. So we discussed this at great length through the budget process last year, and I think there was pretty uniform consensus that this didn't really make much sense. The data was so outdated, there wasn't really any analytical justification for why these SELPAs would continue to get this funding. There was interest in looking at the data and seeing whether we still need a special disabilities adjustment at all, whether there are certain pockets of more severe, higher cost low incidence kids, or whether they are pretty uniformly distributed across the state. So we're working with the department. There was some funding put in for a study to look at the data and see what the distribution is. We don't have that data yet. But as part of the budget negotiations last year, rather than repealing the current SDA formula last year, the legislature decided to give one additional year to give to the districts that are receiving the funding warning that that it was going to be repealed. So we would certainly recommend not sending the funding out per the old formula anymore. It's really outdated at this point. So really your choices now are, do you just cut this funding from the budget, which is what the administration has proposed? I think as outlined in your agenda, there are some concerns about what that would do for our special education maintenance of effort requirement from the feds. Another option would be to spend it on a different special ed purpose. You could send it out on a per ADA basis for all SELPAs. You could look at using it for mental health services if you were going to shift the AB 3632 responsibilities to schools, which is one idea that's being discussed. But again, that would create a $74 million hole in your budget because the administration has proposed to just cut it right now. So if you wanted to continue spending it on special ed, you'd have to find the $74 million elsewhere, assuming you're working within the governor's framework.
Thank you. Ms. Gable?
So the special disabilities adjustment accounts for approximately $70 million of our 2010-2011 general fund appropriation for special education. Currently, 32 of the SELPAs out of the 124 are receiving the funding, and as the LAO has stated, it is set to sunset. So the department is currently working with the Department of Finance and the LAO and legislative staff to define the scope of the study that had been requested and required in the previous Budget Act. In the budget year, the governor's budget eliminates $74 million in special education general funds as a result of the expiration of the SDA formula. So please note that the department believes that a more accurate projection might be $70 million rather than $74 million, and we're happy to work with the Department of Finance on those numbers. So we are concerned, as the LAO noted, that eliminating $74 million in special education general funds could result in a federal maintenance of effort problem for California. The federal law requires that the state maintain at least the same funding level for special education from the prior year. So we had been asked this question, so to say it up front, the feds do allow for a waiver of the maintenance of effort requirements for, quote, exceptional or uncontrollable circumstances, such as a natural disaster or precipitous and unforeseen decline in financial resources for the state. And so while the federal government has granted these waivers, they've been rare, and we wanted to note that the waiver is only available for on a one-year basis. So the very next year, the state would be required to return to the pre-waiver funding levels.
Thank you. And perhaps now you could comment, Lisa, right?
Yes.
On that issue of the waiver and the putting at risk the federal funds.
The largest issue with the maintenance of effort is really determining what the base amount is, and that's been an ongoing issue that we've been working with LAO and the department with determining. So we really do not know what clearly what the impact of anything will be, because we don't know what the true base is with all the components. And it's also calculated in 3 years in arrears. So right now the only maintenance of effort number base we have is 7-8. So going forward, we're not
Do you agree with the concerns, though, that these waivers are rarely given?
I think that we're starting to see, there's, 6 I think have been applied for so far. 3 have been granted. The other 3 are outstanding. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if that, where those 3 are, but yeah, we're seeing, they're starting to see more of them. We don't know what the exact number is. That
were they from natural disasters or economic conditions?
I would imagine they're all economic conditions. I can only guess, but that's what I would say they are from.
Well, it would be helpful perhaps to have that information, to know which ones have been granted would be informative.
We know 3 states have been granted, Kansas, West Virginia, and Iowa, and that 3 are outstanding, and I don't have those names with me. But
all right, thanks.
And then on the issue of the SDA amount, the department or administration would be willing to revisit that amount when the appropriations are released later next month.
And has the department received any preliminary report? I know the study's not due to us until April 1st, so we have a bit of a timing issue here with rushing the budget through, but do you have any sense of it? Have you been getting a draft, or do you know when you'll have any information?
No, we're currently in the middle of scoping out the extent of the study and its parameters with us, with legislative staff and with the Department of Finance, so we do not have a preliminary draft to share with the legislature at this time.
Okay. All right. Move on to the next item, issue number 4. Proposal from the governor to eliminate the Office of the Secretary for Education and increase funding for the State Board of Education. And we'll begin with the Department of Finance.
Good morning. Lori Carney, Department of Finance. Your agenda is pretty...
Lori, what's your last name again?
Carney, with a C.
Carney?
Yes.
Thanks.
Your agenda is pretty comprehensive on this issue, so I'll just give an overview of the proposal, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. The governor's budget proposes to streamline government operations and save general fund dollars by eliminating the Office of the Secretary of Education, saving $1.9 million in budget year and approximately $400,000 general fund in current year. Associated with this proposal, we are additionally proposing an increase of almost $300,000 to the State Board of Education's 11-12 budget to support 3 positions redirected from the Department of Education. And these positions would do a variety of things, including accepting new responsibilities as a result of the elimination of OSE, and improving their responsiveness to outside entities such as the legislature, the administration, and others. Some additional analytical support and improving timeliness and the additional workload associated with their regular board meetings.
Thank you. Jim?
Jim Soland, LAO. So in general, we're supportive of the proposal to eliminate the Office of the Secretary of Education. It's in line with what we've said before on the governance system and trying to make it more streamlined. On the issue of shifting positions to the State Board of Education, we don't think it's necessarily unreasonable to think that there might be increased workload as a result of shifting some of the responsibilities. For example, we know, bill analyses used to be done out of the Office of the Secretary of Ed and a number of other functions that might need to be performed within the State Board. Our only question is really on the details. So far, we haven't received a lot of information on, why there would be 3 positions specifically, and what exactly their role would be. It's our understanding that the information is pending, that the State Board is working on some sort of crosswalk that would show roughly, what responsibilities specifically would be picked up at the State Board of Education. So at this point, generally speaking, there's, conceptual agreement, just waiting to get more information before we can weigh in specifically on the number of positions.
And have you any idea, or have you heard when that information would be available from the State Board? Because I agree, it would be I think very important for us to know, as we're looking at this, exactly what responsibilities they would be assuming.
My understanding is shortly. I don't have a firm date, but I can certainly check in with them and try and provide that information.
Okay. And Ms. Gable?
On behalf of the state superintendent, I would just like to applaud the governor for this move to streamline education leadership on a state level, and the department is supportive of moving those 3 positions over to the state boards should their workload necessitate it.
All right. Any comments on this? Ms. Brownlee?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious to know if the department, do you know, how many positions and what the dollar amount is for staff to support the work of the State Board? Or is it just sort of all blended depending on topical areas?
And I think we have someone from the State Board of Education here, staff member. If you'd like to come forward, maybe you can help us answer.
So just as a brief comment, so the positions of the State Board are separate from the positions of the department, and I'll allow Nick to comment on that.
Sure, thank you. This is Nick Schweitzer, Executive Director of the State Board. We currently have 7 full-time positions supporting the work of the State Board. I can go through in detail what those are, if you would like.
No, the new positions, I think, are really the question in terms of what new responsibilities the State Board would be assuming.
Right, and that's something that we're going to need to, and we are continuing to work out with the governor's office and the state board leadership and the Department of Education, sort of how those responsibilities that the Office of the Secretary of Education used to perform, how those sort of get divided up between Department of Ed and Governor's Office and state board staff.
I know it may seem to be, I don't know, nitpicking to want that information, but I think I would certainly like to have that idea before we take action on this item with the budget. I think it's just our responsibility to be able to justify the position, and hopefully, given that this is work that's already, we're not creating new positions, this is a shifting of responsibility, it would be something that would be able to be forthcoming before we begin to make our final recommendations.
Sure, I will take that back and see if I can expedite things.
And just one more follow-up question. I mean, I just want to say generally I'm very supportive of the concept, and really do want to, we want additional information, but, you know, the streamlining of the process and clear lines of responsibility and accountability, I think is really, is very, very good. The LAO mentioned that it seems actually as a legislator what went on in the Secretary of Education's office was, you know, I didn't know what was really going on in the Secretary of Education's office. So there was some mention that there was a bill analysis that took place within the staff of the state, of the Secretary. And really, in 4 years in the legislature, it was just last year that I realized that they did that and actually saw an analysis or two. But generally, you know, I don't know if it was a secret and it was intended to be kept a secret, but it didn't seem to be a very transparent process to me at all. And I think that if we're doing any kind of analysis of bills, you know, we should be transparent about that. And I don't know whether that responsibility based on this proposal then moves to these potential staff positions, that would be one of their responsibilities. Is it?
I'm sorry, yes. I think the Office of the Secretary of Education used to do several things, including, you know, supporting the governor's office with legislation. There were various advisory committees and boards that they would represent the administration on. They would do some liaising with the legislature. Several other things that you know, we would. The state board staff and, you know, the board president is in some ways already taking on some of the roles of the Secretary of Education in terms of advising the governor, and so, you know, the additional staff of the state board would also support him with that, along with, of course, staff at the Department of Education.
Well, and there's a real feeling, and a very positive feeling, I think, that the state board and superintendent and the legislature, you know, really sort of working together, and I'm very excited about that and welcome it. And so this issue of you know, transparency, that we can help each other in the process of moving forward good policy in the long run is a very positive step in the right direction.
Yes, I agree. We really want to be very supportive of this transition. It's something that was recommended 10 years ago and in the master plan to see that Secretary of Education position eliminated is I think very positive, and it is going to reduce redundancy. And at the same time, I think we're very supportive of having very clear lines of responsibility. And as we're making a funding decision, it's very important for us to have clarity on that as well. So with that, I believe we will move on, unless there's any other comments on this particular item, to the final item on today's agenda, which is the Federal Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Program. And this is an issue that will provide our committee with an update on the status of the development of a state plan for the purposes of applying for the federal Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Program. And this item is for information only. And from the Department of Finance, we have, let you introduce yourself.
Jessica Palio, Department of Finance. Good morning.
Thank you, Jessica.
We received a budget revision request for $841,329 for the Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Program, a planning grant. We submitted our 30-day Section 28 letter to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and the JLBC did not have any concerns. We processed the paperwork, and the department should be moving forward. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, but since this is the department's proposal, we'll defer to them for the details. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and hear all the reports, and I do have some questions. Yeah.
Erin Gable from on behalf of the State Superintendent. So Striving Readers is the Obama administration's new national literacy program. It's a new federal program that has been started for 2010-2011 with an allocation of $250 million nationwide. Initial planning for the funding nationally has been $10 million. These funds were distributed based off of a formula to the states, and a Section 28 letter was approved for our allocation, $41,000, this January. California's initial funds are intended to support the state literacy team with expertise in literacy development to assist our state in developing a comprehensive literacy plan. The state board staff appointed a literacy team on February 3rd of 2011. However, based off of conversations I had with the board president over the weekend, it appears that list is not final. The state board must submit a comprehensive literacy plan to the U.S. Department of Education by April 1st of this year. The State Board of Education staff has submitted a framework for this document, and this will be the starting point for drafting this literacy plan and submitting to the feds. Striving Readers is a comprehensive literacy plan. This will be based off of our newly adopted Common Core standards and our California preschool foundations, as well as existing statutes, policies, and practices here in California. There will be a nationwide competition for distributing the remaining $250 million. This competition will be for implementation of the plans that are submitted to the feds, and this competition is anticipated to have an application available sometime this spring. We're thinking perhaps even as early as this month. And the Striving Readers Literacy Plan, as well as the application, will be reviewed as part of the receipt of these funds. The California Department of Education will continue to involve the legislature in drafting the plan and the application, and we ask that you please provide recommendations for literacy team members to the State Board of Education as soon as possible. The final draft plan will be available for your review prior to the submission to the Federal Department of Education. And we've got Nick here from the State Board to ask any questions, and Phil LaFontaine from the department if you have specific programmatic questions. Thank you.
Just for clarification on the role of the State Board and the role of the Department of Education, could you clarify that for me?
Sure. It's really a collaborative effort. I mean, ultimately, the State Board is, as the state educational agency, is responsible for approving the literacy plan. But the department is certainly helping us with staffing it. They're organizing the first meeting right now as we speak. So it'll be a collaborative effort between the State Board and the Department of Education.
Erin, you used the word nationwide competition. That concerned me. Anytime I hear that when it comes to, funding, and we don't know what the competition will be, it's rather hard to write a plan, isn't it, when we don't even know yet what the requirements are going to be to compete. Do we have any information of what they're looking for?
Yes, good morning. This is Phil LaFontaine for the department. It is a national competition, much like Race to the Top, which kind of strikes fear in some folks' minds. But what we know is that the the Department of Ed back east is really looking for us to develop kind of this birth through grade 12 in helping students to transition from one grade level to the next, from preschool into kindergarten and on. And so there are certain components. We've had a couple webinars with the feds to try and talk about what it is that they're looking for, but we will base it on our Common Core standards that were recently adopted, and as well as the instructional materials, the framework, our academic standards that we already have. It will really try and develop a system that will comprehend all of it.
In terms of English language learners, what is the focus on that as regards to the plan and or maybe even the makeup of the committee? What are you hoping to achieve with our English language learners?
Well, and the same with our students with disabilities. We are really trying to make them the core or part of the core rather than as an add-on. On our team, we have the board has put on several specialists that are very well known in the English language learner world as well as in the special ed world. So it's really where in past it was kind of like they're always into the intervention, and we want to move them into the general ed population and really make sure that their needs are addressed within the general ed classroom and not always out in a intervention. Unless that's what is required or is necessary, then we'll move that way. But there are some very high caliber folks on this team that will help us figure that out.
Very good. Other questions on this piece of the
one quick question.
Agenda? Yes, Ms.
So,
Brownlee.
we earlier in this hearing we had a large discussion about libraries in the state of California, and I'm just wondering, is there any connect here relative to a comprehensive literacy program and how libraries play a role in that?
There's actually a member on the team that is from the library world, so they will help us to make sure that's incorporated in there.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have to help out with that too, because it is ironic that within the space of one morning, we're considering a proposal to eliminate adult illiteracy, a literacy program, and now we're looking at another literacy program, which is good. I think this is I'm glad this is happening. It's a core. It's a very, very core goal, and something that is extremely important for all of our students and children here in California. Well, I think that concludes all of our comments, and we'll go to the public at this time and then bring it back to the committee. So I would invite the public to come forward and ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes. See how many speakers we have, and that'll give us an idea. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is Bob Blattner. I'm here for a number of districts, including Fresno, Elk Grove, Irvine, et cetera. And for the first part, I would just like to say that the special disabilities adjustment was an incredibly contentious issue last year. There was not a consensus on exactly how it should be addressed. And it's important to note that when the special ed system was changed in the late 90s, a cornerstone of the whole thing going into a census track is that, as AIR said, and I can quote from here if you'd like, in their study, that there is a very clear and compelling case that the distribution of high-cost special ed kids is not uniform across the state. And so I think it's something that really should be addressed. Two other things just on things that were mentioned earlier regarding the per ADA funding for the Tier 3 Flex. As you're considering it, do remember that declining enrollment districts do have extra fiscal stress on top of everything else. So I think you do have to treat them with extra care as you're considering moving into a program that's going to reduce their categorical funding. One quick comment on the idea of a study on performance in an era of flex. Given that we've taken hits in the classroom equating to about $25,000 per classroom, looking at how flex is going to affect performance when we've reduced school years, we've eliminated professional development things, it's probably like trying to pick up a sneeze in a hurricane on the radar. I'm not sure that we'd be able to do that. And then finally, would like to, and in this, I'm also speaking now for Sandy Silberstein, who's in Riverside County now working on budget. But we thank the LAO for their wonderful study and really do say that the flexibility we've had has enabled us to more or less keep the wheels on the bus and make the very tough decisions locally and appropriately on where we are going to have to make those $25,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Peter Birdsall, representing the California Association of Regional Occupation Centers and Programs. On the issue of categorical flexibility, if you do look at shifting to a per ADA funding system, ROCPs are, as the name implies, organized regionally. So, for example, Contra Costa is a county-wide ROP. So the ADA would need to be based on the districts, specifically the high school population, we would hope, but certainly the districts they serve, and not on changes to the ADA at the county office, because those services are directed to the students in the districts. And then also just wanted to inform the subcommittee that we are working, the analysts talked about shifting to a system of block grants around critical issue areas. We are working with the other career technical education groups on a career technical education block grant. We are involved in preliminary discussion with the analyst's office. And so as you look at the so-called exit strategy, which we view as 1213, we would like to work with the members of the subcommittee on a categorical block grant for to protect career technical education and provide equal access to those pathway programs.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
Dave Walrath, representing both Small School Districts Association and California Charter School Association. On the deferral issue, small school districts do not have the internal borrowing, as mentioned. Very, very difficult for them. Charter schools have even less borrowing capability. They cannot do tax and revenue anticipation notes because they don't have a taxing authority. So when you look at the order of difficulty of meeting deferral and the cash flow and the types of programmatic effects and cuts, charters are even more endangered by the deferral process than our school districts, which have a few more opportunities. On the flex item, we would urge that there be no addition, deletion, or change from how the flex is going on right now. School districts made plans for 5 years on that. To look at the flex item for another 2 years in a different way, that's okay, but our concern is in small school districts, Assemblymember Brownlee was on the State Allocation Board. When small districts made capital outlay expenditures based on receiving this money in the same amount of deferred maintenance for a 5-year period. If it changes to ADA and they had a decline, now they have to backfill an already made committed capital expenditure. Very, very difficult to do. We would urge any changes that you make only for the extension time, not for the current program. And in that, we would urge you to delete community day schools, program that serves some of the most difficult and at-risk students, was put into the flex item. We believe it should be taken out. We also believe career technical education programs should be taken out, as deferred maintenance should be taken out. Lastly, there's nothing wrong with going beyond the governor's budget for Proposition 98 funding when you look at the economic impact aid, when you look at the special disability adjustments, when you look at other things. Legislative analysts reported on Friday, revenue's up $1.6 billion so far this year. Last, with the increase in revenue, we're in a suspension year. The budget year is not suspension yet. A concern we have is a manipulation of the guarantee by using accrual to lessen the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee. The LAO has reported that happened on the accrual process in this budget to reduce the guarantee by about $1.5 billion. The fear is that in April of 12, when the 11-year economic activity comes in with the income tax payments, that some of that will be accrued back to the 10-11 year, first half of 11, which is a suspension year, and we would receive no benefit from that increase in economic activity for Proposition 98. So if you would consider that as you're looking at language going forward. Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question. I appreciate your last comments, too, so because I wasn't aware of what you were just saying. But relative to this issue about being able to bridge and borrowing money, I'm just wondering if people are putting their heads together to see, for small school districts, for charter schools, for child care providers, everybody has sort of the same problem. And of course, we're putting that problem on them by being in this fiscal crisis and deferring funds. But, do you see a pathway of some kind of, solution that could be developed for them?
Let me throw out a pathway which may or may not be a good pathway. When the controller borrows under revenue anticipation notes for the state's cash flow, theoretically the controller could borrow an additional $500 million at that time. That money would be available then to loan out to school districts who have the deferral problems for intra and potentially for inter-year, basically selling their accounts receivable, the deferral, at a very, very low interest rate because the controller will be issuing out for the state and their revenue anticipation notes usually are much lower. So it would give access to a borrowing capability that many low-wealth small districts don't have because they can't do the same on tax and revenue anticipation because their property taxes are not a large portion. So all of those things. So that's a possibility if you want to think about for the budget year of creating a pool of money that could assist many of the charters and smaller districts and potentially other districts in access to revenue at a fairly low cost if they're not able to do internal borrowing. And lastly, on the flex item, I should have added as well. When you look at consolidating categoricals, and I really hope you will because it's something we've all supported in a long time of looking at this, that the charter school consolidated categorical block grant, the components of that will need to be looked at as well to make sure it's properly aligned with the regular traditional school district when you move into those block grants. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Swanson.
No, just California borrowing at low interest rates.
Lower than many of us.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Next speaker.
Madam Chair, members, Michael Holsizer here today on behalf of 47 school districts in Kern County. I want to speak specifically to items 1 and 2, and that's the extension of the flexibility that was granted first in 2009. This is perhaps the highest priority of our 47 school district leaders, and that specifically is the extension of flexibility as it was first enacted. Mr. Blattner referred to $25,000 a classroom. We're really saying at a state level, this is over $5 billion of cuts that have been made to core revenues in school districts since 2009. It's about $850 a student. When we made those cuts, we were hopeful of a quicker recovery. It hasn't occurred. We have no reason to believe that we're going to make any kind of a significant dent on the deficit factor, which now looks like it's over 19% in the next 2 or 3 years. The LAO's survey provides very clear evidence that school districts have used this flexibility for the exact reason that you wanted us to, and that's to save core program. These school districts are right now making plans right now. In many cases, those plans have to be finalized by mid-March on next year's budget and following year's budget. The clarity and certainty that you can provide them by extending this flexibility is really important right now. I can't emphasize that enough. We need you to do that. We know we're not going to get this money back in the next 2 or 3 years, and this flexibility has allowed us to save these core programs. A couple of recommendations that the LAO specifically makes on page 6 that my school district strongly support. Number 1, take a look at repealing Prop 49. That would provide some additional flexibility to you and to us locally to, again, make important decisions at the local level to save key programs. And secondly, an issue that I know we've, and our superintendents have spoken with some of you before on, take a look at the statutory rules around pay rates and the priority for substitute hiring of substitute teachers. We have no problem with the priority for rehiring and hiring permanent employees who've been laid off. but we think you've got to take a look at giving districts more flexibility on pay rates and paying those employees at the rate that they pay substitute employees and not prior year rate. Thank you.
Yes.
On this repeal of 49, so if we repealed 49, 49 is outside of Prop 98, correct?
Actually, it provides, it's Prop 98 money.
Oh, it is Prop 98.
I had that same question, and one of my colleagues reminded me of it this morning.
Prop 98. So never mind.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Berryhill, did you have a question or? Okay. All right. Moving on.
Fred Main on behalf of the Association of American Publishers, and the AAP is here today to actually oppose the extension of the additional 2 years of flexibility, particularly as it relates to reading instructional materials. I'd like to point out that if the if the flexibility is extended, that the instructional materials in the reading language arts area that students will be using will be 16 years old at the end of the time frame that the flexibility comes back off. Right now, it's a 2002 adoption that school districts are using for their reading language art materials. There was a 2008 adoption subsequent to that was suspended. Our estimates are from last year. We haven't had a chance to look at the LAO's most recent numbers, but that of the 30 largest school districts, only 6 had purchased the 2008 adoptions. That we believe is only 15% of the students in the district or in the state, and we think that it is an issue of equity. That 60% of African American students are below proficient in reading, 61% Hispanic or Latino students, and 70% of students with disabilities are below proficient, and that the 2008 adoption had specific provisions to address those issues. So for that reason, we would oppose extending the additional 2 years.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Madam Chair, members, Jeff Frost, representing the California Council for Adult Education. Regarding the LAO's chart, I'd like to thank the LAO for all the incredible work that they've done. It's going to give you some sense, particularly when their more in-depth numbers come out maybe next week, about kind of what the impacts of Flex have been, and give you a chance to make some determinations about what you want to do in terms of mixing, matching, changing, leaving it where it is. From an adult education standpoint, Mr. Solin's chart indicates that about 10% of the adult schools have been closed, completely closed. But the other 90% have had some significant level of flexibility taken to them. And many districts, including Los Angeles Unified, have proposed for the budget year to completely close. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But there are some very significant changes that are going to happen in the next couple of years in terms of services that won't be provided. I just wanted to make the comment that there are 5.3 million Californians between the ages of 18 and 40 that do not have a high school diploma. Those are your sort of peak work year people, and they're underprepared. The vast majority of those, English is not their first language. So while my organization supports the extension of flexibility because we think it's needed, I think the question is, should some limits be placed on how much you can take out of a particular program? Assemblymember Eng has introduced a bill this year. Mr. Swanson is a co-sponsor of that bill that would limit the percentage of money that can be taken out of adult education in particular. So I think some of those issues are things you might want to think about as you make a final decision. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Brownlee.
Just one question. So the LAO report on this page that you were referring to, I didn't interpret it to mean that adult education, that 10% of the adult education programs have closed down. I am interpreting it as a 10% cut.
I actually asked him that. I asked him that question in the hall as he was leaving to clarify that, and that was the answer he gave me.
So, okay. Well, I'll follow up with LA.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And I think clarity is needed, but that was the interpretation that I got from him.
Thank you.
In terms of our own internal data, clearly more than 10% of adult programs have taken a hit. I think it's 80 to 90% have taken some percentage. I believe in Oakland, Mr. Swanson's adult program has been cut 80%. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Monica Nestrosa on behalf of San Diego Unified. I'm here to speak on the item of the special disabilities adjustment. For us, that is our highest priority for the district. I first want to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Blattner, who outlined very clearly how the only research that we have clearly shows that the distribution of the most severely disabled students, those who it costs the most to meet their needs, are not evenly distributed throughout the state. There is, in fact, variance. And the research that has been produced by the American Institutes of Research went so far as to even compare the variance to statistical noise. They basically wanted to figure out, are these differences that we're seeing across districts and regions of the state, is it something that could be attributed to chance alone? And in fact, they found that the statistical variance was so high that that could not be the case. That really the research is pretty firm in this. There's been no research to counter this to date, that the kids aren't spread out evenly. The disabilities, unfortunately, there is no average IEP. There is sort of no average special ed student. And so that there is this variance that needs to be acknowledged. And the legislature has done a good job of acknowledging it since it created the AB 602 special education formula. And we think that whatever formula there is, there needs to continue to be that acknowledgement of the variance. For San Diego Unified in particular, as some of you have heard, this is a particular sensitive issue because of the reason why we have such a large proportion of these high-need students. And the reason actually is related to the fact that we're a home port for the Navy. One of the things that means, and there's 5 home ports spread throughout the country, we're the only home port in the entire West Coast that specifically is set apart for those military families that have special education students with particularly high needs. They're sent to San Diego both because of the medical facilities that we have in the region, as well as the quality of our special education programs. And they're sent there, these families are specifically sent there so that they can have their children's needs addressed. Well, that's something, a responsibility that we take very seriously, we take with great pride, but it also means that we need additional resources to meet that need. So for that reason, I realize that the legislature is in a difficult position. There's been a study that's been commissioned. We need better data so we can have more refined and precise adjustments. We're hopeful that the study can come about as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, our request for this committee is that as you move forward with a really data-driven approach, not based on hypotheses, not based on speculation, but really based on the hard facts that researchers have produced, which is what is the distribution of these kids. And until we have better data, we ask that you be sensitive to the real consensus of research that has been established, that there are differences across the state, and that those should be acknowledged in how we fund special education. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. Edgar Sazueta on behalf of Los Angeles Unified School District. 2 issues, just very quickly on categorical flexibility. We very much support the governor's proposal for the extension of the 2 years, and we encourage the committee to support that. We would caution against I know there was some discussion from the LAO about looking at this issue of redistribution as there was last year. One of the things that we're very appreciative of this committee, one thing they did last year was to actually look at what the impact of that, of what was going to happen if you do redistribute those dollars based on ADA. Because of the declining enrollment, we obviously fell on the side of we would have lost a substantial amount of money. This is on top of the multi-$100 million deficit that we're facing now. The same issues will be intact this year. And then given all the variables that are up in the air, it makes it all the more complicated. So again, we just don't think it's the right year to be looking at a proposal like that. On special disability adjustment, I think Ms. Enestrosa stated it very eloquently. We were on the same issue last year. I think the consensus last year was, included ourselves, we supported the notion that we need to relook at the data. Obviously, we benefit from this money right now to the tune of approximately $20 million. But if the legislature is either going to zero that sum out or find a different way to redistribute that money, it's going to be a zero-sum game. So like my colleagues from San Diego and the other districts stated, we want to make sure that if you go in that direction, that you look at the data, that, we've been waiting for this April 1st study. We would recommend that if you're going to put the money back in, but this April 1st deadline is not met, that you revert to the formula that you had last year. And moving forward, again, we'd be more than helpful to help with the scope of the study. We'd await those results. If those results mean that we're going to lose funding, then so be it. But just to go off and change that formula or just completely eliminate the funding without that data, we're very, very concerned over that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Tim Fitzharris, California Child Development Administrators Association. Here on the flexibility issue, the chair started this hearing with the issue of performance outcomes. Are there programs that have very successful outcomes, both in terms of dropout prevention and graduations? And there is one that I want to call your attention to. It's called CalSafe. And this is a program for pregnant and parenting teens. We provide the child care, the academic support, the wraparound services, health background, and it's been very successful. It's 164 agencies, meaning high schools, and in 44 counties. And 90% of them are achievement gap kids. Mm-hmm. So we know the outcomes for those kinds of kids already. So we're putting this in, if a girl becomes pregnant in high school, we have data show a 20% graduation rate. With this CalSafe program, our children have 73% graduation rate, and this is over 10 years. It's been researched. The department has put out a report 6 months ago on the 10-year outcomes for this program. It's very easy to see it. So the question is, has it been cut? The report that the LAO just put out this morning showed last year, or the last time they surveyed, very small cuts. Clearly, districts want to save these programs. But this year, it shows a pop. We have our own data that shows that 20 programs have been cut, 21 programs have been cut in high schools. About 20 or 30 more have been reduced severely. And for the number of children served, since 2008, 31% of the children are not being served. Or, put another way, 13,000 students served in 2008. In 2010, only 9,100. So we're losing the kids. And you know where they go if we lose them. And you heard the other hearing on child care and CalWorks, we know where this could wind up. So this is a serious issue, and we're asking you to try to protect this category. There may be other categories. I don't know the other categories. And by the way, we have two clients here, a high school student and a baby. On the baby side, we provide immunizations. We do all the child development stuff at the highest level. And you made some decisions last year to protect that category and keep the high level of standards and mandates that are for the child. You made that decision last year, so that's already here. It's probably the only program where the mandates still exist in the flex item. What we're proposing here, and giving you language on the last page of that handout, is an exception for high performance, high outcome programs. We would suggest that if we have research, independent research, that shows over a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year period that their outcomes, graduation rates 65% higher, certified by an outside organization, on a long-term basis statewide, and the superintendent says so, that we would not allow the cutting of those programs inside the categorical block grant. Now, the money stays the same amount of money goes to the counties, or to the school districts. But this program, and any others, I guess, that have that kind of outcomes, leave them alone. Now, I've heard other solutions here, maybe that's pull them out altogether or do other kinds of things if that's where you're going. But we can prove this is an outcome measure affecting achievement gap kids. A third, by the way, go on to community colleges. So I think we need to call your attention before you go on with this, that this is a population that's desperate in need of your help, and it works. So thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. I appreciate it, definitely. Next speaker.
Good almost afternoon, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Nancy Lacasse, and I'm representing various school districts. It's a long list, so I won't go into it, as well as the County Superintendents Association. Constant theme, I just want to say that you have really tough decisions before you, and I recognize that, and I think that the testimony today was very thoughtful, a lot of things for your consideration. The one thing I hear consistently from every one of the superintendents that I work with around the state is local control. Give us local control. You're giving us a number. You're telling us that the districts are responsible for outcomes, student achievement. Give us the ability to make those decisions locally on how to get there. So on behalf of Long Beach, Sacramento City, Clovis Unified, Corona Norco, Torrance, we ask that you continue flexibility and look at some of the sensitive issues around career technical education and adult education. Those are important populations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker.
Terry Burns, on behalf of a number of different clients. The first, I would like to associate myself with remarks of Mr. Frost regarding adult education. So on behalf of California Association of Adult Education Administrators, I want to note that school districts are not, in the traditional sense, held accountable for outcomes for adults. And yet you're still going to have this population here with you. If you decide to take no action, you are sentencing these folks to no services, to a life in poverty. It is that simple. They simply don't have the job skills. They don't have the training necessary. To not fund these programs, you are making a conscious decision to cut them off. I disagree that that's the right decision, but I understand that you have limits with what you can do. It is important to make a decision to protect at least some semblance of program, an infrastructure of program that is there when more resources arrive. Mr. Rang has a bill that will start that process, that will maintain some infrastructure, but to simply say that it exists in a couple of cities, but not all cities, is insufficient. These are not folks who have transportation. These are not folks who are comfortable going to community colleges. These are folks who are at the very poorest levels of our society and who need that assistance. While we're talking about the lack of accountability in the system, we'll also talk, I'll move to my other client, California Association for the Gifted. We don't have a great testing system that tells how we're serving our most gifted students. A student who goes into fourth grade reading at the 8th grade level is counted above proficient. That same student comes out of fourth grade still reading at the 8th grade level, they're still advanced. That same student who finishes 5th grade still reading at the 8th grade level is still considered advanced, even though he or she's made no progress for 2 years. We don't have a system that shows well how we're doing that. In fact, in flexibility now, we don't even have a system that encourages school districts to identify those students anymore. Particularly students who are not the typical student who's, the white upper class, middle income student who is expected to be able to do all these things, might get the support from their family to get identified. Students in poverty, students whose parents are not native English speakers, don't necessarily push for their students to be identified. We're leaving these kids out of the loop, and we would very much support the idea of directing some services towards them. Finally, I would concur with Mr. Holzheiser's comment that districts need to know as soon as possible what you're going to do here on terms of extension of flexibility. Everybody is out there today making up their budgets for next year and 2 years out. And so the sooner we can have some guidance and clarity from you, the more helpful that will be. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
On the issue of gifted kids, I think we've never had enough funding for, gifted kids. On the question of adult education, though, so why do you think that at the local level you're asking for protection from the state level? So why at the local level do you think local boards, understanding that they've got to balance and weigh a lot of different things, but why do you think that they would, sort of eliminate these programs with adult ed being in the flex?
Well, I'll tell you why. I'm a local school board member myself, have been for many years. One of the reasons is that you're bringing up before you little Sally. She's in 2nd grade. She's cute, she's got the freckles, the whole thing, and she's saying, please don't cut my teacher. Please don't cut my program. And then you bring up a 20-year-old high school dropout who has much less a sympathetic a personality in that regard. So first of all, you've got that measure to mix. The next thing you have is the state's accountability system that gives me no credit at all for having passed all kinds of, gotten all these folks into jobs, given them high school diplomas, getting citizenship. No, the state's accountability measure for how a K-12 school district gets funded and works is the API and the AYP, which talks about graduation rates and test rates that have nothing to do with the adult education program. So if I'm going to go into program improvement, it isn't because of what I'm doing with my adults. It's because it's what I'm doing with my K-12. That's where I'm putting my funding. It's a tough decision, but that's where we're at.
Thank you. All right, we've got to get through, a few more speakers here in a few minutes.
You mentioned on planning purposes by March 15th. That's because that is when you have to, in fact, give layoff notices to teachers. How much would it help to give you some, to roll that back a month or two, that mandate of March 15th?
It'd be very helpful to know that, and I say that because in the first place, you have teachers who decide that they're likely going to be gone and may not be teaching at their most effective level for the rest of the year. In the second place, it helps everyone with a little more certainty of where they're going to be as we move forward. Let's find out more information. What is the legislature going to be doing? Because right now we are just guessing.
Yeah.
And it's a very
and it's really
process.
brutal on people. You know, you go out there and you have to, as a school board, you got to do what you got to do, but it's not very fair.
It isn't fair. It isn't fun. It's really hard on families.
Okay. All right. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson and members of the subcommittee. My name is Martha Zaragoza Diaz, and I'm representing Californians Together and the California Association for Bilingual Education. My first point, I'd like to speak to the Striving Readers Program. I'm very heartened to see that the Department of Education and the State Board of Education will be working collaboratively on this literacy program. It is an opportunity for the state to develop a model literacy program that could be generational, multi-generational in its approach from birth to 12th grade, and we hope that the Department and the State Board will learn from some of the mistakes made from the previous literacy program and take a look at what can be done better this time around. And I'm very pleased to see that English learners and special education students will be in the core of this literacy program. My next comments relate to the flexibility program. The clients would approve the extension of the 2-year, would like to support the 2-year extension of the flexibility program, but with several caveats. One is we've always heard at the beginning of the discussion regarding flexibility, it's flexibility with accountability. And so there was a move to provide at least some type of transparency and accountability of reporting of information. Unfortunately, in the previous administration, it was chosen not to necessarily comply with current education code section regarding reporting and the accounting. We believe that this is an opportune moment for the committee to revisit those two provisions and take a look at how we could have that information provided to you. We think that this would be valuable information as policymakers with regards to the data that you will need in order to determine whether to go forward with the flexibility program as is, how to change it, or how to eliminate, or whether to eliminate it. We're not going to be in a fiscal crisis forever. Hopefully, this fiscal crisis will terminate in 3-4 years. And so we would like to have the most data as possible with regards to what happened to which students under which conditions. And so that's, would like for you to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Catherine Goddard. I'm a parent here in the state of California. This is my first trip to the state capitol, so I'm hoping I can articulate some of the viewpoints for the foundation of Educate Our State and Support California Kids. We are and currently have 35 supporters. These are parent-led statewide campaigns to unite the voices of California in support of high-quality K-12 public education. We demand real change. We all know that California is drastically falling behind in every measure of educational outcomes, including test scores, dropout rates, funding per pupil, teacher-student ratios, and more. Now is the time for real change. The current public education system is broken. We recognize the complexity of both the problem and the potential solution. We are focusing our reform efforts on several fundamental building blocks we believe are essential to a high-quality education. Today, we would like you to focus on a public education system that supports a weighted student formula in which the dollars follow the students and are adjusted for different students' needs. This would eliminate most categorical funding streams, providing a more simplistic and transparent system to understand and implement. There would be strict accountability from the school districts to the state to ensure that they are meeting all students' needs and academic goals. A big part of this platform is transparency and accountability. Despite the legislature's adoption of language in the Emergency Budget Act of 2009 to link categorical flexibility with sunshine for parents and the public as well as information for the public and policymakers, the California Department of Education was apparently made to understand that that's not what the language means, and shared this interpretation with school districts in a letter dated April 9th of 2009. We believe California's Department of Education's letter misinterprets the Education Code Section 42065. What it says is, as a condition of receipt of funds, the governing board of the school district or board of the county office of education, as appropriate at a regularly scheduled open public hearing, shall take this testimony from the public, discuss, approve, or disapprove the proposed use of funding, and make explicit for each of the budget items in paragraph 2 of subdivision A the purposes for which the funds will be used. There is no ambiguity here. Although the budget letter dated April 2009 would like you to believe that. It actually states there is some ambiguity in that law.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. We're really pressed for time.
We are urgently asking the legislators to require the California Department of Education to stop misinterpreting the law and to rescind its April 2009 directions to districts that they are required to hold public meetings. As a parent, as a community member, as a just anybody that would like to say something in terms of this type of budget crisis that we're having, it's very hard to do that when you don't understand how complex this is. So we would ask that you allow us to be engaged in that way. Finally, some school districts are following the language in the Emergency Budget Act, however, some are not. We would like you to keep this provision in the Budget Act and to enforce it.
Okay.
We do support the extension of categorical flexibility funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Cedric Cuellar. I'm with Californians for Justice. I'm a statewide campaign director, also with the Campaign for Quality Education. And we represent a base of students and parents who are directly impacted by a decision being heard today on the issue of flexible categorical funding. First of all, I'd also like to thank Member Brownlee for leading the discussion on education finance reform and trying to make our educational system better for all students. So thank you for that. California for Justice and the CQE are in favor of flexibility, but we also need to be transparent, and we also need to involve students and parents in the discussions about these decisions being made around flex funding and what's going to be happening there. So please, especially when we are discussing funds that are originally targeted for students who are from low-income families, our students of color, our EL learners, and students with the most needs. So we agree with the LAO's recommendations of linking flex funding to students and refocusing CDE's mission of data accountability and administration of best practices. Especially, we urge lawmakers to require CDE to redirect districts to hold public hearings when flex funding decisions are being made, and also to require the tracking of these flex fundings using the original code so that people understand and know what's being cut and also what's at stake for their students when this is happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I think we would like to associate ourselves with the testimony of the prior three speakers. This is $4.5 billion, the categorical flex item. That's about 7% of all that's going to schools. Those funds were originally targeted to specific needs. So to stop tracking them, as that has been done now based on the Department of Ed's letter, essentially wipes that away. That's a policy shift that was not intended. It was intended that they be flexed so that the doors remain open. So that has worked. Doors have remained open. But to say that those funds are going where they were intended originally, they could be, but we don't have that information, and that's our interest in getting you, in providing you the language of the statute, which we passed out, as well as the Department of Ed's letter, which we also passed out. Mm-hmm. What we are, in terms of accountability, outcomes based on student test scores are not the way to go. We know that students will just, their test scores will just be low. They'll be achievement gap kids. And we'll just be telling districts to do better. What we want is the outcome of where funds are going. And that's part and parcel of the reform that Assemblymember Brownlee and others have been leading, and it's very important. So whether this is temporary, whatever you want to do with it, for the future, you have to know what you're doing with it now. One more point is that, excuse me, I think I made my points.
Thank you. All right. Next speaker.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Pam Bachilla on behalf of the Alameda County Office of Education, the Oakland Unified School District, and the San Francisco Unified School District. The fiscal flexibility provisions proposed by the governor give us what we need to prioritize programs locally and to work with our parents in doing so. Do want to ask you to be sensitive to some of the challenges created for ADA-driven programs within the flexibility. In Alameda County specifically, our CalSafe program has struggled because the base year was set at a time when our enrollment was low due to a fluke program closure that year. So you've heard about some of the other ADA-driven programs. Please include CalSafe in that. And then for San Francisco Unified School District, the K-3 class size reduction flexibility is of particular importance. We're at 22-to-1 right now. We don't want to go any higher. We'd like to stay there, and the flexibility program gives us the ability to do that. And then for the Alameda County Office of Education particularly, also want to thank Assemblymember Brownlee for your work on fiscal reform. We'd like to see the flexibility conversations around money tied to flexibility and accountability and assessment programs and a complete overhaul that allows us to empower our local communities and local leaders in developing assessment intervention models that are tied to our funding. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Thank you. Madam Chair and members, Dennis Myers with the California Association of School Business Officials. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised at my testimony that our organization is very supportive of extending the flexibility provisions for 2 years all across the board, not just Tier 3, but all of the things that the governor's proposing. When that was put into place, I'm just amazed at the foresight of the folks that put together the Tier 3. Not so much for any of the programmatic effects, but just seeing that the next 3 to 4 to even 5 budget cycles were going to be so horrible that decisions needed to be made locally on how to weather that fiscal storm. And so we're now in the middle of the third budget cycle with huge implications. Deferrals and cuts that right now are equaling about $18 billion, and after this budget is done, it could be more than that. And that really just to go right back to the reason where flexibility came from. That's the main thing. We're facing a fiscal crisis. We needed flexibility to weather that storm. We needed flexibility to manage our cash flow so that we weren't begging the state for bailout loans. And so far, it's been fairly successful. And we're asking that continue for another 2 years. The main thing that we're looking at here is that extending it for 2 years gives us the ability to not only manage the storm that we're seeing happening right now, but also to try to build a bridge back. We want to encourage more discussion about fiscal reform, but even if that doesn't occur, or whether it does, we need to figure a way with more time to get back to a time when we have strings attached and we have things attached to these certain pots of money. So right now, really, it's just a way to manage our cash flow, manage these cuts, we're just asking for an extension of 2 years. We're also cautious that we not change what flexibility looks like right now. Districts have looked at that and are planning on flexibility as it stands right now. We're very cautious about this redistribution, about tying it to ADA, because if it does amount to redistribution, where there are losers as well as winners, then as an organization, we'd be vehemently opposed to that, because it's changing the rules right now at a time when we really can't afford to do that, because we need to just kind of know what our budget's going to look like, as far out as possible, and having that flexibility allows us to do that and to plan forward. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we'll conclude our hearing. We want to thank the public again. It was very informative as well. We are going to be holding all our actions open, and with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.